Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the strange rituals of the ancient Scythians, where the truth is, these nomadic warriors celebrated victories with hemp-fueled steam baths, far from the Hollywood depictions of endless horseback raids. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. We're stepping into a world where the sky is endless. The grass sways like waves on a green sea, and the air buzzes with the scent of freedom and cannabis smoke. Yep, you're among the Scythians now, those nomadic warriors who knew how to live life on the edge of a sword, and perhaps under the influence of a bit of herb. These folks roamed the vast Eurasian steppes from the 9th century BC to the 4th century AD, an impressive run for a group without a fixed address. Now, let's talk about their infamous love affair with cannabis. It wasn't just for kicks, though you can bet they had a good time. In Scythian culture, cannabis was as much a part of religious ceremonies as chanting or sacrifices. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing around 440 BC, gives us one of the earliest accounts of this ritualistic heartboxing. He describes how the Scythians would throw hemp seeds onto red-heart stones inside small tents and then inhale the vapors, shouting with joy. Herodotus might have been the original travel blogger, but with a penchant for embellishment, so take his stories with a pinch of salt, or maybe a puff of smoke. Archaeologists have backed up old Herodotus, though. Excavations of Scythian burial mounds, known as kurgans, have unearthed braziers containing charred cannabis seeds. These finds aren't just ancient party favors. They tell us that cannabis had a place in Scythian rituals, likely used to commune with the divine or perhaps to honor the dead. The kurgans themselves, some over 4,000 years old, stand as silent witnesses to these smoky ceremonies. But why the fascination with getting high? Well, let's get real. Life on the steppe was brutal. Imagine battling the elements, rival tribes, and possibly a poor diet consisting mostly of meat and dairy. A little herbal relief might have been just what the medicine man ordered. Also, remember that the Scythians didn't have Netflix or TikTok to entertain them, so cannabis might have been their version of a chill night in. That said, our modern fascination with the Scythians' high lifestyle sometimes borders on romanticizing what was probably just another day on the job for them. We like to think of them as these mystical stoners, but the truth is they were fierce warriors who left a trail of fear and respect in their wake. While they were getting their zen on, they were also perfecting the art of mounted warfare. The Scythians were among the first to master riding and shooting simultaneously, a skill that turned them into formidable foes and mercenary darlings from Greece to Persia. And let's not forget the economic angle. Cannabis might have been a spiritual tool, but it was also a trade commodity. The Scythians were savvy traders, dealing in everything from gold to slaves. Their nomadic lifestyle demanded a keen understanding of supply and demand, and cannabis was just one of the many items they could offer or barter. The Scythians' use of cannabis is a knotty tangle of spirituality, necessity, and economy. It's easy to get swept away by the romantic image of these noble savages finding enlightenment in the smoke. But remember, these are the same folks who'd gladly relieve you of your head as they would a puff from their pipe. It's this duality that makes the Scythians so intriguing, a blend of the mystical and the martial, as unpredictable as the steppes they called home. So, as you wander through this ancient landscape, keep an eye out for the next twist in the tale. There's more to the Scythians than just their herbal exploits, and rest assured, their story is far from ordinary. If you think the Scythians' herbal endeavors were their only claim to fame, think again. These folks had a reputation for something a tad more macabre, drinking from the skulls of their enemies. Yep, that's right. This wasn't just some goth phase. It was a full-blown cultural practice steeped in symbolism and perhaps a bit of showmanship. It's one of those historical nuggets that make you wonder if these ancient warriors were the original metalheads, with a penchant for the dramatic. Let's give a nod to the Greek historian Herodotus, who penned quite the narrative about this gruesome ritual. According to him, the Scythians would use the skulls of their defeated foes as drinking vessels. Now, before you dash off to cancel your next dinner party, it's worth noting that Herodotus had a flair for the theatrical. If the ancient world had a bestseller list, his tales would top it, but they often come with a side of skepticism. Yet he wasn't entirely off the mark. Archaeological digs have indeed unearthed Scythian skull cups. These relics, found primarily in burial sites, tell a story that's as much about status as it is about savagery. So, what's the deal with sipping out of a skull? Was it just a way to prove their badassery, or was there more under the surface? In Scythian society, drinking from a foe's skull wasn't just a flex. It was a way to absorb the strength and soul of the vanquished. This wasn't your average happy hour. It was a blend of spiritual triumph and psychological warfare. Imagine facing enemies who not only threatened your life, but promised to make a souvenir out of your noggin. That's a level of intimidation that doesn't just send shivers down the spine. It gives you a full-body freeze. Herodotus might have been onto something when he painted the Scythians as fierce warriors with a taste for the dramatic, but actual archaeological evidence offers a slightly different picture. While skull cups have been found, they are relatively rare, suggesting this wasn't an everyday practice, but rather a special occasion sort of affair. Think of it like your grandma's fine china, brought out only when company came over, except a bit more, gruesome. And let's not forget the economic context. The Scythians were traders at heart, and their rituals weren't just about personal vendettas. They were a part of a broader cultural economy where symbols of power could be leveraged for political gain. A skull cup wasn't just a morbid trophy. It was a statement piece, a conversation starter, and perhaps even a bargaining chip in negotiations with other tribes. In a world where power dynamics shifted with the seasons, having a reputation for collecting heads could keep potential adversaries on their toes, or, more accurately, off their heads. It's easy to get swept up in the horror and drama of skull cups and blood rituals, but don't let the sensationalism blind you to the strategic genius behind these practices. The Scythians were a complex society that used every tool at their disposal, including fear, to maintain their dominion over the steppes. They were as adept at playing the psychological game as they were at warfare. It's this blend of cunning and brutality that makes them such fascinating figures in history. A people who could make a point with a well-aimed arrow or a well-polished skull. So, as you ponder the Scythians' penchant for bone china, remember that behind every story is a layer of strategy, a hint of practicality, and of course, a dash of good old human curiosity. It's this combination that keeps their legend alive, even as the truth remains buried in the steppes, waiting for the next archaeologist or history buff to unearth it. Stay tuned, because the Scythian saga is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as intriguing. Speaking of unearthing treasures, let's dig into the Scythians' burial rituals, where the buried treasure concept takes on a whole new meaning. You'd think these nomadic warriors, who lived in tents and rode the winds of the steppe, would have simple funeral practices. But oh, how you'd be wrong. Their burial sites, known as kurgans, were like stepping into an ancient episode of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. If the rich and famous had a flair for dramatics and a penchant for taking a few friends with them to the afterlife, these kurgans weren't just graves. They were monuments to the power and prestige of Scythian nobility. Think of them as the original bling, where status was measured in gold, not Instagram followers. We're talking about some seriously lavish setups here, like King Tut meets Mad Max levels of opulence. They were constructed as large mounds, some towering over 20 meters high, and inside they were filled with treasures that would make a pirate weep with envy. Gold plaques, jewelry, weapons, and even intricately crafted gold animals. These were not your grandmother's heirlooms, but the Scythians didn't stop at gold. In a move that screams ancient world extra, they often included human sacrifices in these burials, usually servants or wives, because why rest in peace when you can rest in a macabre entourage? This practice wasn't just about ensuring the deceased had company in the afterlife. It revealed a lot about Scythian beliefs and societal structures. The Scythians believed in an afterlife where you could continue to enjoy the same privileges you had in life. And what's more privileged than having your own servants, even in death? This brings us to the economic implications of such practices. Gold wasn't just a pretty metal to the Scythians. It was a symbol of power and an essential part of their trade economy. The Scythians were master metal workers, crafting exquisite gold artifacts that were traded across Eurasia. The wealth buried with the dead was a testament to the economic prowess of these nomads. It was also a way to display wealth that couldn't be flaunted in life, because, remember, these folks didn't have permanent homes to decorate with their riches. Now, before you start imagining the Scythians as ancient one-percenters hoarding wealth in the ground, consider this. These burials were also a form of social insurance. By burying their wealth, Scythians ensured that their descendants had a tangible legacy. It was an investment in their family's future, an ancient trust fund, if you will. And while the glitz and glamour of the Kurgans might seem like overkill, they served a very practical purpose in a society where reputation and legacy were everything. Let's not forget the political angle. Lavish burials reinforced the social hierarchy. They were a visual reminder of who held power and why. Imagine being a rival tribe, stumbling upon a kurgan filled with gold and guarded by the souls of fallen warriors. It's like the ancient version of a neon sign flashing, "Don't mess with us." These burials were more than just personal affairs. They were political statements, a way to assert dominance long after the Scythians had ridden off into the sunset. And what about the common Scythian, you ask? Well, they didn't get quite the same VIP treatment. Their graves were simpler, though they too believed in an afterlife. Their burials reflected their life on the steppe, practical, with the essentials for the journey to the other side. The contrast between noble and common burials highlighted the deeply ingrained social stratification within Scythian society. It was a world where who you were in life determined your send-off in death. But even in death, the Scythians were forward-thinking. Gold might have been a status symbol, but it was also a hedge against the uncertainties of the future. The Scythians understood the value of leaving a legacy, of ensuring that their story continued to be told, and perhaps that's why we're still talking about them today. Their burial practices weren't just about honoring the dead, they were about preserving the memory and power of the living. This brings us full circle to the Scythians' unique blend of practicality and spirituality. They lived hard, fought harder, and buried their dead with a flair that has left us with some of the most intriguing archaeological finds in history. Each kurgan is a time capsule, offering a glimpse into a world where life and death were celebrated with equal intensity. And while we may never fully understand the Scythians' motivations, we can appreciate the legacy they left behind, a testament to a people who knew how to make a statement in life and in death. So as you ponder the mysteries of these ancient nomads, remember that the Scythians were more than just warriors or traders. They were storytellers, leaving behind tales etched in gold and earth. And though the steppe winds have long since scattered their ashes, their stories remain, waiting to be discovered by the next curious soul daring enough to dig a little deeper. And there's more to uncover, so stay tuned, because the Scythian saga isn't done unrolling its scroll of secrets just yet. Now, speaking of stories etched in the sands of time, let's dive into the mystical side of the Scythians, their shamans and spiritual practices. You see, while these nomadic warriors could slice and dice on horseback like nobody's business, they also had a foot firmly planted in the ethereal. Enter the Scythian shamans, the enigmatic figures who served as the bridge between the earthly realm and the divine. In Scythian society, shamans weren't just your average wise men. They were the spiritual heavyweights. With the power to enter trance states, these guys were the ancient equivalent of your Wi-Fi, connecting the living to the otherworldly. But forget any romanticized image of bearded mystics chanting in a forest. Scythian shamans were hardcore, and their rituals matched the intensity of their warrior culture. Imagine it's the 5th century BC, and you're witnessing a shamanic ritual on the steppes. The air is thick with the scent of burning herbs. No, not just cannabis this time, though it did make an appearance. We're talking a heady mix of plants that would put your local herbalist to shame. The shaman, clad in animal skins and adorned with bones and feathers, starts to dance around a fire, entering a trance. This isn't your run-of-the-mill meditation session. The goal was to embark on a spiritual journey that involved other realms, where the shaman could seek guidance from the spirits. And what's a journey without a soundtrack? Drumming was central to these rituals, the rhythm pounding like a heartbeat, pulling the shaman deeper into the trance. These sounds weren't just for show. They were believed to alter consciousness, priming the shaman for their spiritual voyage. It's like the original trance music, but with real stakes. But why go through all this effort? Well, for the Scythians, these rituals were about more than just spiritual enlightenment. In a society where warfare was as much part of daily life as hunting or trading, keeping the social order intact was paramount. Shamans played an essential role in this, acting as mediators between the physical and spiritual worlds. They were the counselors, the healers, and sometimes the judges, wielding influence that could rival a chieftain's. In fact, the intersection of shamanism and the warrior ethos is where things get really intriguing. The Scythians believed that the spiritual guidance provided by shamans could directly influence battles. The spirits consulted weren't just abstract entities. They were considered active participants in the Scythian way of life. Some shamans even claimed to predict the outcome of conflicts or provide warriors with charms for protection or victory. Now, before you dismiss this as superstition, consider the psychological edge this could provide. Knowing that a shaman had blessed your weapons, or that the spirits were on your side, was like carrying a secret weapon, one that could boost morale and instill fear in enemies. It's a classic example of the power of belief, where psychology and spirituality intersect to create a formidable force on the battlefield. And let's not forget the economic angle, because in Scythian society, nothing was ever just spiritual or just practical. Shamans were often compensated with goods, livestock, or even precious metals, reflecting their high status. This was no fringe gig. It was a respected profession with real economic benefits. The shaman's role in maintaining social cohesion was invaluable, especially in a culture where alliances and rivalries could shift with the wind. But of course, the romantic image of the all-powerful shaman comes with its own pinch of salt. Sure, they wielded significant influence, but they also operated in a world of uncertainty and danger. The stakes were high. Misinterpreting the spirit's messages could have dire consequences, both personally and for the tribe. Mistakes weren't just frowned upon, they could be fatal. It was a high-risk, high-reward gig, one that demanded not just spiritual savvy, but also a keen understanding of human nature and the social dynamics at play. So, while the tales of Scythian shamans weaving magic on the steppes might capture our imagination, the reality was a blend of mysticism and practicality. They were the original life coaches, guiding their people through the turbulence of steppe life with a mix of spiritual insight and hard-earned wisdom. And in a society as unpredictable as the Scythians, their role was as crucial as the sharpest sword or the fastest horse. As we continue to unravel the Scythian story, it's clear that their world was one where the mystical and the material were entwined in a dance as complex as any shamanic ritual. The shamans were navigators of this intricate web, ensuring that the Scythians didn't just survive on the steppes, but thrive. So, while we might marvel at their warrior prowess, let's not forget the spiritual architects who helped hold their society together with rituals as profound as they were mysterious. And speaking of mysteries, there's much more to explore in the Scythian saga. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll delve deeper into the lives and legacies of these formidable nomads. The steppe winds still whisper their secrets, and who knows what revelations lie just beyond the horizon. But enough about the mystical wind whisperers and their trance music. Let's talk about the real headliner of this Scythian saga, the legacy of their rituals. These aren't just dusty old practices, buried under layers of history, but cultural echoes that have bounced through the ages, leaving a footprint larger than a Scythian kurgan. From romanticized tales of fierce warriors to grim narratives of brutal rituals, the Scythians have woven themselves into the tapestry of both ancient lore and modern popular culture. First, let's travel back in time to see how their contemporaries viewed them. The Greeks and Persians, who had more interactions with the Scythians than they probably wanted, were fascinated by these nomadic enigma warriors. Herodotus, our favorite ancient historian/gossip columnist, wasn't shy about chronicling their cannabis-fueled rituals and fearsome skull cups. His tales of the Scythians inspired both awe and dread, painting them as almost mythical figures, half barbarian, half poet-warrior. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and you'll find European scholars digging into classical texts, reviving the Scythians as a symbol of wild freedom and untamed nature. They became the poster children for the noble savage trope, a narrative that conveniently ignored their complex society and economic savvy. They were reimagined as romantic figures, the kind of people who could ride bareback across a canvas at full gallop, bow drawn, with a wild mane of hair flowing behind them. It's easy to see why. They were the rock stars of the ancient world, living fast and leaving a trail of legends in their wake. But let's pump the brakes on that romantic chariot for a second. The darker side of their legacy, the bits without the rose-colored filter, involves some pretty gnarly stuff. Take their ritualistic use of skull cups, for example. While it makes for a great campfire story, it's often exaggerated to paint the Scythians as more bloodthirsty than they were. Yes, they used skulls as drinking vessels, but it was more about symbolism and psychological warfare than mindless brutality. It's one of those historical truths that's both fascinating and a little unsettling, kind of like discovering your cool uncle was also the town's taxidermist. In the modern era, the Scythians get a makeover as characters in literature, movies, and of course, video games. They pop up as archetypal warrior nomads in everything from fantasy novels to blockbuster films. Ever played a video game where you controlled a cavalry archer that could hit a bullseye while galloping at full speed? Tip your helm to the Scythians, whose horseback combat skills have inspired countless digital reenactments. They've become the archetype for the fierce, independent warrior, a testament to their enduring appeal. But why do they keep coming back in our stories? Perhaps it's because the Scythians embodied a paradox that still resonates today. They were both savage and sophisticated, both ruthless and strategic. It's this duality that keeps them alive in our imaginations. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, the capacity for both violence and culture, brutality and beauty. And let's not forget the economic angle. Their trade networks were extensive, stretching from the Black Sea to the borders of China. This wasn't just a bunch of horsemen raiding and pillaging. They were savvy traders who knew how to work the supply and demand game. They dealt in gold, slaves, and yes, cannabis, making them key players in the ancient economic world. Their ability to adapt and thrive without a fixed address is a lesson in economic flexibility that still holds water, or rather mead. So why does any of this matter? Well, beyond the cool factor of wielding a bow on horseback, the Scythians teach us about the complexities of cultural legacy. They show us that history is never black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of truths, half-truths, and outright myths. Their story is a rich tapestry of contradictions, woven by the hands of warriors, traders, and shamans. It challenges us to look beyond the romanticized tales and grapple with the gritty reality of the past. In the end, the Scythians remind us that history isn't just a collection of dusty facts and figures. It's a living, breathing narrative that shapes our present and future. Their story is still being told, not just in textbooks, but in the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and who we aspire to be. They were more than just their rituals or their battles. They were a culture that thrived on the edges of the known world and left their mark on it. So, as you drift off into the realm of dreams, think of the Scythians not just as fierce warriors of the steppes, but as complex characters in the grand drama of human history. Their legacy is a testament to the power of myth and reality, a reminder that the past is never truly past. It's always with us, shaping the stories we tell, the games we play, and the way we understand our world. Sweet dreams, and may your adventures be ever as daring as a Scythian on horseback. You're standing there, squinting into the sun, your feet already aching in those cobbled-together boots. It's recruitment day, and you're about to trade your plowshare for a pike. Why? Because in 14th century England, the soil doesn't exactly shower you with gold, and a peasant's life is anything but pastoral bliss. The promise of a few pennies a day, and maybe some loot sounds like a winning lottery ticket compared to the grind of farming. But before you start dreaming of epic battles and glorious feats, let's get one thing straight. Being a medieval foot soldier is about as glamorous as mucking out a stable. The local lord, a man whose silk doublet is worth more than your entire village, has sent his recruiter to round up able bardies. You're not exactly given a choice. It's either sign up or risk being labelled a coward, which, let's be honest, doesn't do wonders for your social standing. Plus, the recruiter's persuasive spiel about duty to king and country has a certain ring to it, especially when he mentions the possibility of plunder. Who doesn't want a shiny new bauble or two? Training. Well, that's a generous term for the crash course you're about to receive. Think more along the lines of here's your spear, don't poke your eye out, rather than a full-fledged boot camp. You're drilled in formations, taught to march in unison, and shown how to swing a sword without lopping off your own limbs. If you're lucky, you might even get to practice with a crossbow, which, let's face it, is medieval warfare's answer to point and click. Now, let's talk economics. A soldier's pay is a whopping 2 to 6 pence a day. To put that into perspective, you could maybe buy a hen, or if you're feeling particularly flush, a pair of sturdy shoes. Meanwhile, the cost of your gear, helmet, chainmail, weapons, could set you back a small fortune. An arming sword alone could cost you 6 shillings, which is basically a year's wages for some. If you don't have a wealthy patron, you're stuck with hand-me-downs and whatever you can scrounge. It's like showing up to a Formula One race in a horse-drawn cart. Of course, the romanticized stories of medieval warfare paint a picture full of heroic knights and noble deeds. But once you hit the battlefield, it's less Braveheart and more Game of Thrones on a particularly bleak day. The stench of sweat and fear mingles with the clanking of armor and the shouts of commanders. You're knee-deep in mud, trying to keep your footing while dodging arrows that buzz past like angry bees. The reality is a chaotic mess of bodies and blood. Forget about those epic single combats between gallant knights. Most of your time is spent in the crush of bodies, trying to avoid a spear to the gut. It's brutal, it's grim, and it's nothing like the tales sung by minstrels in cozy taverns. In fact, if you want to know how those stories get it so wrong, just consider that most minstrels have probably never seen a battlefield up close. Their tales are crafted for entertainment, not accuracy. But hey, you're out here making history, or at least surviving it. The political and social stakes are high, with kings vying for power and territory like they're playing a particularly cutthroat game of Risk. Your role in this grand chess game might seem minor, but you're the pawn that makes the king's gambit possible. The truth is, for every knight in shining armor, there are hundreds of you, the foot soldiers, the backbone of medieval warfare. You're the unsung heroes, or maybe just the expendable ones, depending on how you look at it. Either way, you're here, you're fighting, and you've got a front row seat to one of the most tumultuous periods in history. So, as you stand there, spear in hand, remember this. The road ahead is fraught with peril, and the tales of glory are often written with a healthy dose of poetic license. But in the end, it's your grit and determination that'll see you through. After all, in the world of medieval warfare, survival is its own kind of victory. And speaking of survival, let's dive into the daily grind of a medieval foot soldier, where the romance of battle quickly fades with each weary step. Marching was your bread and butter, though bread was often more a figure of speech than a staple in your diet. You'd slog through up to 20 miles a day, which sounds like a great workout plan, until you remember you're hauling gear that weighs more than your last harvest. Your boots, if they could even be called that, were more like worn-out leather sacks tied around your feet. Blisters, more like second skin. As if the physical slog wasn't enough, let's talk rations, or the lack thereof. The so-called field cuisine often involved hardtack, a bread so dense it could double as a weapon. And don't even get me started on the meat, which was cured with enough salt to preserve it longer than any modern-day canned goods. If you were lucky, you get a bit of pottage, a stew of dubious ingredients that might include anything from vegetables to mystery meat. A medieval foot soldier's diet was less about nutrition and more about staving off starvation. Now, forget any notion of a mobile medieval feast. Your belly was more likely to rumble than to revel. And when food ran low, creative solutions emerged. Like, say, foraging, because nothing says elite military force like scrounging for berries. Water was another gamble. Streams were your best bet, assuming they weren't fouled by, well, anything upstream. Dysentery was practically a soldier's rite of passage, a grim reminder that nature didn't care about your quest for glory. Socially, the foot soldier's world was a curious mix of hierarchy and fraternity. You had your commanders, knights, and lords, whose armor gleamed with the luster of privilege. For the rest of you, camaraderie was forged in the fires of shared hardship. You might not have known the names of all your fellow soldiers, but you knew who snored like a dragon and who could coax a fire from damp wood. Bonds formed on the march were as essential as the weapons you carried, because when arrows rained down, you needed to know who had your back. The hierarchy was rigid, but necessity bred a surprising egalitarianism among the ranks. When you're elbow-deep in mud, titles matter less than trust. And let's not forget the camp followers, the unsung logistics team who provided everything from laundry to, less savory services. Their presence was both a necessity and a comfort, adding a layer of humanity to the harshness. Now, about that myth of chivalry, that romanticized code of honor and valor. Spoiler alert, it didn't exactly trickle down to the common soldier. Knights might have been bound by ideals of gallant conduct, but for you, the rules of engagement were more about survival than courtesy. The battlefield was a place where pragmatism trumped valor. A well-placed dagger in the back was worth a dozen chivalric vows. Sure, the stories love to paint battles as grand spectacles of individual heroics, but in reality, it was more about the messy chaos of collective struggle. The notion of fair play was as foreign as a warm bath. Pillaging was less an act of villainy and more a practical necessity when your wages barely stretched to your next meal. If that meant liberating a few trinkets from the defeated, well, so be it. Life as a foot soldier was a constant negotiation between the legend and the reality. You were part of massive battles with grandiose names, like Agincourt or Bannockburn, but you were also just trying to keep your head down and your feet moving. The stakes were high, not just for kings and kingdoms, but for you and your fellow soldiers struggling to survive the grind. You were part of history's grand narrative, even if your name wouldn't be remembered in the annals. In the end, the medieval foot soldier was less a hero on a quest and more a survivor on a march. Your days were filled with exhaustion, hunger, and the occasional glimmer of fellowship, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of relentless adversity. So, as you trudged along those dusty roads, spear in hand and dreams of glory firmly in check, you knew one thing for sure. In this brutal Game of Thrones, you were both a player and a pawn. And that, my friend, is the unvarnished truth of medieval military life. Let's dive into the thick of it, shall we? You've been trudging along with your fellow soldiers, dreaming of glory and maybe a decent meal, when suddenly the clamor of battle breaks out like a medieval alarm clock. Welcome to the front lines, where chaos reigns supreme and instructions are more like vague suggestions shouted over the din of war. Forget about noble duels and chivalric gestures. This is a gritty, down-and-dirty free-for-all, where the only rule is do what you must to survive. Let's talk tactics first. Sure, you've got your spear, and maybe you've managed to grab a shield that isn't too riddled with holes, but the real game-changer on the battlefield is the longbow. This isn't just any bow. It's the medieval equivalent of a sniper rifle. A well-trained archer could send an arrow flying over 250 yards, piercing armor and pride with equal efficiency. And in case you were wondering, those longbows weren't wielded by knights in shining armor, but by your fellow peasants, trained to turn the tide of battle with a hail of wooden death. Then there's the crossbow, the longbow's shorter, starkier cousin. It doesn't have the same range, but what it lacks in distance, it makes up for in sheer starping power. A crossbow bolt could punch through plate armor like a hot knife through butter, and unlike the longbow, it didn't require years of practice to master. Just point, click, and hope the guards are on your side. It was the great equalizer on the battlefield, the weapon that made even a lowly foot soldier a force to be reckoned with. Now, brace yourself for the reality check. All those romantic notions of knights charging valiantly into battle, more like a desperate dash across a muddy field, hoping you don't end up face first in the muck. Forget about those epic one-on-one battles. The real fight is a chaotic muddle of screams, clashing steel, and the ever-present fear of an unseen arrow with your name on it. If you've ever wondered why medieval warfare wasn't for the faint of heart, well, this is your answer. And here's a fun tidbit. The psychological toll of warfare wasn't just a modern phenomenon. Medieval soldiers, knight and peasant alike, were no strangers to the horrors of battle. The constant threat of death, the screams of the wounded, the sight of friends falling beside you, these things leave a mark. PTSD might not have had a name back then, but its shadow loomed large over the battlefield. In fact, chronicling the experiences of returning soldiers, medieval manuscripts often hint at the struggle to reintegrate into society, to find peace after living in the eye of the storm. As for those noble knights, the so-called paragons of chivalry, let's just say they weren't above a little underhandedness when it came to winning. Siege warfare, for instance, was less about gallant charges and more about starving your enemy into submission. And if that meant poisoning their water supply or catapulting diseased carcasses over the walls, well, all's fair in love and war, right? It's a brutal reminder that the line between heroism and villainy is often determined by who gets to write the history books. And let's not forget the battle strategies that would make Machiavelli proud. The famed English tactic of the chevauchée was essentially sanctioned looting, a fast and furious raid designed to demoralize the enemy and strip their lands of resources. It was less about territorial conquest and more about showing who was boss through a healthy dose of medieval scorched earth policy. The French weren't exactly fans, but as they say, to the victor go the spoils. In the end, the battlefield was an equal opportunity nightmare, where the only certainty was uncertainty. Every clash was a reminder that glory was fleeting and survival was the real prize. So, as you stood there, in the thick of it all, you weren't just fighting for king and country. You were fighting for the chance to tell your own tale, to emerge from the fray with scars to show and stories to tell. And as you trudged off the battlefield, weary but alive, you knew that in the world of medieval combat, that was the greatest victory of all. And there you have it, a slice of life from the medieval front lines, where heroism is as much about grit as it is about glory. Hold on to your helmet, because there's more to come. The story continues, and so does the march through the annals of history. So, you've survived the melee, scraped together a victory, or maybe just an escape, and now you're stumbling off the battlefield, muscles screaming, adrenaline ebbing, and let's be honest, more than a little bit of trauma tucked under your helmet. But what happens next? Spoiler alert, it's not exactly a hero's parade. First, let's talk injuries. In the medieval medical handbook, most remedies were about as effective as a wish on a falling star. If you caught an arrow or a sword to the gut, well, good luck. Battlefield medicine was a grim affair, with treatments that make modern-day quacks look like Nobel laureates. Imagine your local barber surgeon, who likely learned his trade by cutting hair and slicing bread, now tasked with removing an arrowhead lodged in your thigh. Here's a fun fact. Anesthesia wasn't a thing. That's right. While you were biting down on a leather strap, your friendly neighborhood Sawbones was digging around with a pair of iron tongs, trying to extract that bit of shrapnel. If you were lucky, he'd have a steady hand and a strong stomach. If you weren't, well, let's just say infection was a regular, unwelcome guest. The concept of sterilization was about as real as a unicorn in your backyard. Even if you managed to dodge death on the operating table, the road to recovery was no picnic. Antibiotics were centuries away, and antiseptics were more a fever dream than a reality. Gangrene was an ever-present specter, ready to claim limbs faster than a medieval tax collector could claim your last penny. To put it bluntly, surviving the battlefield was often the easy part. Surviving your wounds was the real miracle. Now, let's say you beat the odds, walked, or limped away from the carnage, and made it back to your village. You might imagine a warm welcome, a hero's feast, and maybe a toast or two in your honor. But here's the kicker. The reality was often less red carpet and more cold shoulder. While bards sang of valiant knights and noble victories, the common foot soldier returned home to find that life had moved on without him. Society wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome wagon. Your neighbors were more likely to see you as a burden or a reminder of the war's brutality than a conquering hero. Many soldiers found that their homes had been seized or their families had moved on. The fields were still there, stubbornly refusing to plow themselves, and now you had a bum leg and a haunted look in your eye that didn't exactly inspire confidence in your farming abilities. Economically, war didn't do wonders for your wallet. Remember those glorious promises of plunder and wealth? Turns out, they were about as reliable as a medieval weather forecast. Sure, you might have pocketed a few baubles or a battered helmet, but the cost of living, food, shelter, the odd bit of ale, didn't take a vacation just because you were off playing soldier. Many returning men found themselves worse off than before, trading the supposed riches of conquest for a harsh slap of reality. But let's not forget the psychological toll. Today, we might call it PTSD. Back then, it was called being changed by war, and change you did. The constant threat of death, the memories of fallen comrades, the sheer horror of battle were not easily left behind. Some soldiers managed to reintegrate, to find solace in the mundane, but others roamed from town to town, restless and haunted, searching for a peace that seemed forever out of reach. As for the societal impact, well, war was a double-edged sword. It could unite a people under a common cause, but it also left deep scars that took generations to heal. Villages were depopulated, economies strained, and the social fabric frayed by the demands of constant conflict. The romantic notion of noble warfare belied the harsh truth. War was a brutal, grinding machine, and foot soldiers were its most expendable parts. So, the next time you hear tales of medieval glory and gallant warriors, remember this. Behind every knight in shining armor were 100 foot soldiers, trudging home with little more than scars and stories. They were the true backbone of medieval warfare, the unsung heroes who bore the brunt of battle and returned to a world that scarcely recognized their sacrifice. As we look ahead, remember that the story of the medieval soldier doesn't end here. There's more to explore, from the shifting tides of warfare to the evolving roles of those who fought on the front lines. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this gritty saga, where we'll delve deeper into the lives of those who fought and bled for a crown that often forgot their names. History often paints a grand tapestry of battles won and empires forged, but the stitches holding it all together, those are the foot soldiers, the unsung thread weaving through the tumultuous fabric of medieval warfare. Sure, our knightly friends get all the spotlight with their shiny armor and gallant steeds, but it's the ordinary men with mud under their nails and calluses on their hands who shape the battlefield, and by extension, history itself. First off, let's talk about numbers. The medieval battlefield wasn't populated by legions of noble knights, but by thousands of foot soldiers, often outnumbering their mounted counterparts by 10 to 1. In the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, it wasn't just Henry V's charismatic leadership that won the day. No, it was the English longbowmen, standing shoulder to shoulder, who rained down arrows like medieval missiles, turning the tide against overwhelming French forces. The longbow, cheap and deadly, put power in the hands of the common man, a democratizing force in a feudal world. But what about the impact on society beyond the battlefield? You see, these soldiers weren't just cogs in the war machine. They were agents of change. The 100 Years' War, for example, wasn't just about English and French monarchs squabbling over thrones. It was a prolonged conflict that reshaped the economic and social landscape of Europe. Foot soldiers, drawn from the peasantry, brought home not just scars and stories, but new ideas and experiences. This cross-pollination of cultures helped chip away at the rigid feudal system, slowly paving the way for the Renaissance and the eventual rise of the modern nation-state. Economically, warfare was a double-edged sword, or maybe a double-edged battle-axe. On one hand, the constant demand for soldiers shifted power dynamics. Lords needed men to fight, and this gave the peasantry a bit of leverage, however slight. On the other hand, the devastation left in the wake of armies often meant that those same soldiers returned to fields that lay fallow and villages that struggled to recover. War might have been good for some blacksmiths and armorers, but for the average foot soldier, it was more about survival than prosperity. Socially, the returning soldiers also brought back a certain egalitarian spirit. On the battlefield, a man was judged by his courage and skill, not his birthright. This experience of camaraderie and shared hardship slowly trickled back into civilian life. It said that necessity is the mother of invention, and as these men adapted to the brutal demands of war, they also learned to question the status quo. While the immediate post-war periods didn't see peasants storming castles with torches and pitchforks, the seeds of social change were quietly sown. Now, let's debunk a myth or two while we're at it. The medieval soldier's life is often romanticized, with tales of honor and glory. But let's be real. The average foot soldier wasn't penning sonnets or rescuing damsels. No, he was more likely to be foraging for food or cleaning his equipment, hoping to avoid the next bout of dysentery. The reality was gritty and unforgiving, with little room for the chivalric ideals so often sung by minstrels. If anything, these men taught us that true heroism isn't found in dramatic gestures, but in enduring unimaginable hardship with grit and determination. Let's not forget the psychological legacy, either. The horrors of battle left indelible marks on those who fought, and while we might not have detailed accounts of PTSD from the Middle Ages, the echoes of trauma can be found in the literature and art of the period. The stories of soldiers haunted by their experiences remind us that the human cost of war is timeless, a shadow that stretches from the past into our present. So, what lessons can we draw from these unsung warriors of yore? For one, they remind us that history isn't just about kings and castles, but about ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. They teach us about resilience and adaptability, about the power of the collective over the individual, and perhaps most importantly, they show us that while the tools of war may change, the human spirit remains a constant force, capable of enduring the darkest of times. In reflecting on the legacy of medieval foot soldiers, we're given a glimpse into the enduring fascination with this period. It's a time that continues to captivate our imaginations, not because of the shining armor or the grand castles, but because of the raw humanity that underpins it all. These soldiers, with their dreams and struggles, remind us that history is not just a series of dates and battles, but a complex tapestry of lives lived. In their stories, we find echoes of our own hopes and fears, a testament to the timeless nature of the human condition. As we close this chapter, it's worth remembering that the lessons of the past are not just historical curiosities. They offer us a mirror, reflecting both the best and worst of humanity. So, let's carry forward the tales of these unsung heroes, learning from their endurance and ensuring that their sacrifices are not forgotten in the annals of time. In doing so, we honor not just their memory, but the enduring spirit of those who stand on the front lines of history, now and always. You wake up to the kind of cold that doesn't just nip at your nose. It practically invites itself into your bones for a long-term stay. Welcome to a typical morning in an Inuit village, where the Arctic air is less of a gentle breeze and more of a slap-in-the-face reminder that you've chosen a lifestyle that laughs in the face of comfort. But hey, who needs central heating when you've got the camaraderie of a village and a breakfast that could fuel a small army? Now, let's talk about that breakfast. Forget avocado toast and lattes. You're diving into a meal that's all about survival, seal meat, fish, and maybe some berries if you're lucky. This isn't just a culinary decision, it's a tactical one. The high-fat content is like a natural thermal blanket for your insides, keeping you warm and energized for the tasks ahead. And trust me, you'll need it. Speaking of tasks, today's agenda, a hunting trip. But before you dismiss this as another episode of Survivor, Arctic Edition, let's set the record straight. Hunting here isn't just a sport or a pastime. It's a fully fledged operation with the kind of precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. And to pull it off, you'll need some serious gear, none more iconic than the Ulu knife. Think of it as the Swiss Army knife of the Arctic, a crescent-shaped marvel of engineering, perfectly designed to slice through blubber and stand up to the unforgiving elements. Not just a blade, but an extension of your hand, this tool has been passed down from generation to generation, a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the Inuit. Now, let's debunk a common myth while we're at it. The Inuit are often portrayed as nomads, endlessly wandering the Arctic tundra like they are on a never-ending quest for self-discovery. The truth, their movements were as calculated as a chess grandmaster's opening gambit. The Inuit followed the migrations of animals, setting up seasonal camps that maximized their hunting success. So no, they weren't aimlessly drifting about like feathered travelers in a snow globe. They were strategic seasonal settlers, adapting to the ebb and flow of the natural world with an expertise that would make even the most seasoned survivalist sit up and take notes. As you prepare for the hunt, you can't help but appreciate the sheer practicality of the Inuit way of life. Every tool, every movement has a purpose. Take the kayaks you'll use to navigate the icy waters, for instance. These are not your average weekend paddle boats. Crafted from driftwood and animal skins, they're the original all-terrain vehicles, perfect for sneaking up on unsuspecting prey. And let's not forget the clothing. Layered furs that make you look like you've stepped out of a prehistoric fashion show, but with the added bonus of keeping you alive. Each piece is meticulously crafted to trap heat and repel water, because in the Arctic, dampness is just a polite way of saying hypothermia is coming for you. As you step out into the blinding white landscape, it's hard not to be humbled by the sheer scale and beauty of it all. Sure, it's cold enough to freeze your eyelashes together, but there's a stark majesty that speaks to the resilience of the people who call this place home. You're not just surviving, you're thriving in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And as you set off on the hunt, ulu in hand and optimism in heart, you carry with you a legacy of cunning and adaptability that has been centuries in the making. The day is young, the air is crisp, and the Arctic awaits. As you set off across the tundra, the landscape stretches out in a seemingly endless sea of white, the Arctic equivalent of a minimalist's dream. But don't let the stark beauty fool you. This journey is no walk in the park. You might think a Fitbit would be useless here, but trust me, if it could handle the cold, it'd be flashing numbers that scream, "You're a rock star." Because these hunters are about to cover distances that would leave marathon runners in awe. Let's talk transportation, because walking isn't going to cut it when you're chasing seals across a frozen expanse. Enter the Kajak, the sleek, stealthy watercraft that's as much a work of art as it is a tool of survival. Picture it, a frame of driftwood and whalebone stretched tight with sealskin, making it waterproof, windproof, and everything-proof. This isn't just a kayak. It's the Arctic's answer to a luxury sports car, capable of slicing through icy waters with the grace and speed of a well-oiled machine. Kind of like if Ferrari and Mother Nature had a love child. And here's a fun fact. The Kajak is so perfectly balanced that even the most turbulent waters can't tip it over easily. Think of it as the original Unsinkable ship, long before Titanic gave the concept a bad name. As you paddle, you realize the Kajak isn't just about getting from point A to point B. It's a calculated extension of the hunter, designed for stealth. Silence is key when your prey has ears that would put a bat to shame. The Kajak allows hunters to glide across the water, almost like a ghost, a shadow slipping beneath the radar. And here's the kicker. These vessels are often custom-made for the hunter, tailored like a bespoke suit to ensure maximum efficiency and comfort. The Inuit were personalizing their rides long before it was cool. Now, let's dive into the economics of this whole hunting gig. You might think it's all about the thrill of the chase, but spoiler alert, it's more about the bottom line than you'd expect. Catching a seal isn't just about feeding your family, it's a cornerstone of the community economy. One seal can provide food, clothing, tools, and even fuel. That's right. Seal oil is the Arctic's version of black gold, lighting lamps and cooking meals when wood is as scarce as a warm beach day in January. Each successful hunt is a community event, not a solo bragging right. You've got the hunter, sure, but they're backed by a support network that includes everyone from the seamstress who stitches the Kajak's skin to the elder who passes down the secret spots where seals like to hang out. It's a team effort, a communal enterprise where everyone plays a role. Whether it's preparing the gear, scouting the best locations, or preserving the catch. Think of it as a prehistoric version of a startup, with everyone investing in the success of the venture. Seal hunting is also a lesson in sustainability. The Inuit take only what they need, ensuring that the seal population remains stable. It's a delicate balance, a dance with nature that's been perfected over centuries. Contrast that with the often reckless exploitation seen in other parts of the world, and you start to appreciate the wisdom in their method. The Inuit recognized that the Arctic, for all its harshness, is a finely tuned system, and they were careful not to upset the balance. But let's not romanticize it too much. While there's certainly skill and tradition involved, there's also the raw, uncomfortable truth that hunting is a brutal business. It's bloody, dangerous, and fraught with uncertainty. A storm can roll in faster than you can say, frostbite, and prey doesn't always cooperate with your best-laid plans. Seal hunting isn't for the faint-hearted or the squeamish. It's a gritty reminder of what it takes to survive in a place where nature holds all the cards and isn't afraid to play them. As the day wears on, the hunters continue their trek, their breath visible in the frigid air, faces set with determination. You can almost hear the silent calculation, the mental maps they're drawing as they track their quarry. These are not just hunters. They're strategists, ecologists, and craftsmen rolled into one, masters of their environment in a way that would make the most seasoned urban survivalist look like a rookie. And so the journey continues, the rhythm of paddles against water, the quiet crunch of snow underfoot, the whispers of wind across the ice. It's a world where every action has weight, every decision a ripple in the delicate balance of survival. As you move with the hunters, you realize this isn't just a day in the life. It's a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a people who have turned one of the planet's harshest landscapes into their home. The Arctic isn't just a place, it's a teacher, and the Inuit are its most dedicated students. The hunt continues, the story unfolds, and the adventure is far from over. As the hunt continues, you start to see the bigger picture, like stepping back from a painting and realizing there's more than just brush strokes. It's not just about catching a seal. It's about weaving through the intricate tapestry of Inuit social structures and survival tactics. Let's be real. The Hollywood image of the lone hunter, braving the elements with nothing but grit and a spear, is about as accurate as a weather forecast for next month. The truth is, the Inuit had developed a complex society where survival wasn't the burden of one, but the responsibility of all. First off, let's talk leadership. In many cultures, leadership is all about who can shout the loudest, but the Inuit had a different approach. Leadership here was less about brawn and more about brains, like a chess tournament with Mother Nature as the opponent. Leaders, or Isumarak, were chosen for their wisdom, their ability to make decisions that would benefit the community, not just themselves. Forget about flashy titles or golden crowns. The real currency here was knowledge and experience. You could say that being a leader was the original lifelong learning course. And while we're on the subject of knowledge, let's debunk another myth. The idea that Inuit society was simplistic or primitive. In reality, it was a highly organized system built on shared resources and communal support. You know those TV shows with people voting off the weakest link? Yeah, that wasn't the Inuit way. They recognized that every person had a role to play, from the elders who passed down crucial survival tips to the youngsters who learned to master the kajak. In essence, the village was like a well-oiled machine, each cog turning in harmony with the others. Now, let's zoom in on the day-to-day politics. Decisions were often made through consensus, which sounds like a dream, until you realize it's like trying to pick a restaurant with a group of friends. Everyone had a say, and while this could slow things down, it ensured that every voice was heard. This was democracy in its purest form, minus the campaign ads and political spin. And talk about practical governance. These decisions could range from where to set up the next camp to how to divide the spoils of a hunt. The idea was simple but effective. Everyone contributes, everyone benefits. Speaking of contributing, let's puncture the Hollywood balloon of the solitary warrior. The notion of a lone hunter is as appealing as it is misleading. Sure, there were solo hunts, but major expeditions were communal affairs. Picture a group of hunters working in unison, each knowing their role like the back of their hand. It wasn't just about catching food. It was about ensuring the survival of the entire group. Hunting was the original team sport, complete with strategies, playbooks, and the occasional halftime pep talk. And here's where it gets fascinating. The Inuit had this down to a science. The hunting parties were organized with military precision, each member assigned specific tasks. One might scout, another might carry gear, and others would be responsible for the actual kill. It was a logistical ballet with the Arctic as the stage. Think of it as a prehistoric version of Ocean's 11, where the prize was not cash, but the guarantee of another day on this frozen planet. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life was tough, and the stakes were high. The Arctic is not a place for the faint of heart or the indecisive. Resources were limited, and every decision had a ripple effect on the community. This is where the unspoken rules of survival came into play. The Inuit understood that waste was the enemy, and sustainability was their ally. They had mastered the art of using every part of their catch, from the meat to the bones to the fur. This wasn't just thrifty. It was a necessary strategy in an environment where the term "too much of a good thing" simply didn't exist. And here's a nugget of truth that might surprise you. The Inuit survival wasn't just about physical prowess. It was about mental agility as well. They had to be as adaptable as the animals they hunted, ready to change tactics as the environment dictated. It was a constant game of adaptation, a mental gymnastics match where the rules could change at any moment. If you're looking for a masterclass in resilience, the Inuit have been teaching it for centuries. As midday approaches, the hunters pause to eat, their meal a testament to the communal spirit. Everyone shares, ensuring that each member is fueled for the tasks ahead. It's a scene that speaks volumes about the Inuit philosophy. Survival is a shared endeavor, a community project where success is measured not by individual glory, but by collective well-being. In the quiet moments, as you sit with the hunters, you can't help but feel the weight of history. These people have carved out a niche in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, and they've done it not through isolation, but through cooperation and ingenuity. The Arctic is their home, and they've mastered its challenges in ways that are both humbling and inspiring. So, as the day continues and the hunt presses on, remember this. The story of the Inuit isn't just one of survival. It's a saga of resilience, adaptability, and the unbreakable bond of community. It's a tale that defies the simplistic narratives and celebrates the complexity of human ingenuity. The Arctic may be harsh, but within its icy embrace lies a warmth found in the enduring spirit of those who call it home. And as the journey continues, so too does the story, unfolding with every step across this frozen expanse. As the hunters press on, the Arctic sun begins its slow descent, painting the snow in hues of pink and gold. It's a reminder that even in this frozen tableau, time marches on, nature's way of saying, keep up or get left behind. Now, let's tackle the spiritual side of things because, believe it or not, hunting wasn't just a matter of survival. It was a deeply spiritual act. The Inuit didn't just see animals as food on legs. They viewed them as fellow inhabitants of a shared world. This wasn't some hippy-dippy reverence for Mother Earth. It was a pragmatic worldview born from living on nature's knife edge. Respect the animals, and they'll offer themselves in return. Disrespect them, and you might find yourself on the menu instead. It's less circle of life and more circle of mutual understanding. Inuit spirituality was intertwined with animism, the belief that all things, animals, plants, even inanimate objects, possessed a spirit. Imagine living in a world where every snowflake has a soul and every seal is a sentient being. Talk about pressure. But this belief wasn't just for the feel-good factor. It had practical implications. It dictated how hunts were conducted, with rituals and taboos ensuring that hunters took only what was necessary and wasted nothing. The result? A sustainable balance that kept both humans and animals thriving. Now, let's debunk a myth. There's a romantic notion that these spiritual beliefs were quaint fireside tales with no real-world impact. In reality, they formed the bedrock of a survival strategy that had been honed over millennia. These beliefs were like an ancient code of conduct, an unwritten constitution that governed interactions with the environment. Forget about the idea of the noble savage communing with nature. This was about hard-nosed pragmatism dressed up in spiritual garb. And speaking of stories, the Inuit were master storytellers, weaving tales that were as much about preserving knowledge as they were about entertainment. Think of it as an ancient TED talk with the added bonus of keeping you alive. The elders, the human libraries of their time, passed down generations of accumulated wisdom through oral traditions. These weren't just yarns spun to pass the time. They were instructional guides, survival manuals wrapped in narrative form. If you've ever thought storytelling was just about keeping kids entertained, think again. In the Arctic, stories were the original life hacks. Take the legend of Kiviak, for instance, a wanderer who faced trials that would make Odysseus break into a cold sweat. Kiviak's adventures weren't just thrilling tales for a winter's night. They were blueprints for navigating the unpredictable Arctic landscape. Each story was a lesson, each character a mnemonic device to ensure that crucial survival tactics were remembered and passed on. If you thought your grandma's bedtime stories were intense, try living in a place where forgetting the moral could mean the difference between life and death. But let's not forget the economics of storytelling. Yes, you heard that right. In a world without written records, oral tradition was as valuable as currency. Knowledge was power, literally. Those who knew the stories held the keys to survival, and that made them invaluable community members. It was a barter system of brains, where each tale was a deposit in the communal bank of wisdom. The elders were the original influencers, their words shaping the actions and decisions of their listeners. And here's a fun fact. The word Inuit means the people, a simple yet profound statement of identity that underscores the community's interconnectedness. It's a reminder that this wasn't just a collection of individuals braving the cold. It was a collective effort, a society built on mutual support and shared knowledge. If you think modern social networks are revolutionary, the Inuit were way ahead of the curve, building their own version long before Zuckerberg was a twinkle in Silicon Valley's eye. As the afternoon shadows lengthen, the hunters gather to share the fruits of their labor. This isn't just a meal. It's a celebration of life, a communal reaffirmation of their bond with each other and the land. Each bite is a reminder of the delicate balance they maintain, a dance with nature that has sustained them for generations. It's a scene that would make a gourmet restaurant envious, not for the food itself, but for the richness of the human experience it represents. So, As the day winds down, take a moment to appreciate the intricate tapestry of Inuit life. It's a world where spirituality, storytelling, and survival are woven together with threads of resilience and ingenuity. The Arctic may be unforgiving, but within its icy embrace lies a warmth that defies the cold, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who call it home. And as the sun finally dips below the horizon, painting the sky with the last vestiges of daylight, remember this. The story of the Inuit isn't just one of survival. It's a saga of adaptation and community, a testament to the unyielding human spirit. The Arctic may be harsh, but within its frozen heart beats a story of life, love, and the pursuit of harmony, a story that continues to unfold with every passing day. And so, the hunters make their way back to the village, weary but victorious, as the Arctic twilight wraps the world in a gentle embrace. The journey back isn't just a trek across the snow. It's a triumphant return, a modern-day ticker-tape parade minus the confetti and with a lot more seal blubber. Picture the scene. The village comes alive as the hunters arrive, like a scene from a black and white film, suddenly bursting into technicolor. There's an air of anticipation, a buzz that ripples through the community as word spreads faster than gossip in a small town. As the hunters unpack their haul, you start to see the real economic impact of a successful hunt. It's not just about filling bellies, it's about sustaining an entire community. The seal meat, for example, isn't just a meal. It's a veritable smorgasbord of resources. One adult ringed seal, weighing in at around 60 kilograms, can provide enough meat to feed several families, and the blubber is a high-energy food source that's more effective than any protein bar you'll find at your local gym. Forget kale and quinoa. In the Arctic, seal fat is the ultimate superfood. But it doesn't stop there. Every part of the seal has a purpose. The skin becomes clothing, robust enough to withstand the Arctic winds that laugh in the face of your windbreaker. The bones are fashioned into tools, the sinews into thread, and the oil into fuel. It's a zero-waste operation that would make any environmentalist shed a tear of joy. In fact, the value of a single seal could be compared to a small economic stimulus package, injecting much-needed resources into the village ecosystem. This communal sharing isn't just about practicality. It's a social event that reinforces the ties that bind the community. The scene is reminiscent of a potluck dinner, where everyone brings something to the table, except here, the menu is dictated by the whims of nature. Conversations flow as freely as the seal oil, and stories of the hunt are recounted with the kind of embellishments that would make a fisherman proud. It's a time for laughter, for bonding, and for celebrating the sheer audacity of thriving in a place where nature would rather you didn't. And here's an interesting tidbit. These gatherings serve as an informal news network, akin to an ancient version of the evening broadcast. Information is shared, decisions are made, and the social fabric is strengthened with each tale told and every meal shared. It's a living, breathing example of how community and communication are as vital to survival as food and shelter. Now, let's zoom out a bit and take a look at the bigger picture. The Inuit way of life, with its focus on community and sustainability, offers a stark contrast to the individualistic, consumer-driven societies many of us live in today. In a world obsessed with accumulation and convenience, the Inuit remind us that sometimes less is more. Their practices are a masterclass in resource management. A lesson in living within one's means that modern society could learn a thing or two from. But let's not get too misty-eyed. While the romantic notion of a harmonious existence with nature is appealing, the reality is that this way of life is born out of necessity, not choice. The Inuit didn't choose to live sustainably because it was trendy. They did it because the harshness of the Arctic demanded it. It's a gritty, no-nonsense approach to survival that, while admirable, is also a reminder of the brutal realities they face, where a bad season could mean the difference between prosperity and starvation. And how have these ancient practices held up in the modern world? Quite well, as it turns out. The principles of Inuit life, adaptability, community, and respect for nature, are more relevant than ever in the face of global challenges like climate change. As the Arctic warms faster than any other region on Earth, the Inuit are at the forefront of witnessing and adapting to these changes. Their ability to pivot, to innovate, and to work together in the face of adversity is a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. The modern world has much to learn from the Inuit, whose practices illustrate a profound understanding of their environment and an ability to thrive in conditions that would make most of us want to crawl under a heated blanket and not come out until spring. Their story is a reminder that survival isn't just about endurance. It's about adaptability and the strength of community ties. As evening falls and the village settles into the comforting routine of another night, the lessons of the day linger like the warmth of a shared fire. The Arctic is a place where the stakes are high, but the rewards are equally so. It's a world where the spirit of community isn't just a quaint ideal, but a powerful force that ensures survival. The Inuit have carved out a place in this frozen landscape, not through domination, but through cooperation and respect for the delicate balance of nature. So, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps under the glow of a seal oil lamp, let the story of the Inuit serve as a meditation on the possibilities of living in harmony with the world around us. It's a tale of resilience and resourcefulness, of people who have not just survived, but thrived against all odds. And maybe, just maybe, it's a story with lessons that can guide us all, no matter where we call home. So, you're living in Viking society, not as a horn-helmeted barbarian. Yeah, that's a myth too, but as part of a complex culture that's less Valhalla and more ruthless capitalism on steroids. Sure, the image of Vikings as noble warriors is alluring, who wouldn't want to swap the daily grind for a life of adventure on the high seas. But peel back that romantic veneer, and you'll find that the real economic engine of this Norse world isn't the sword-wielding Viking, but the thrall, a slave caught up in the relentless gears of plunder and trade. Let's set the scene. It's the 8th to 11th centuries, and Scandinavia is a bustling hub of maritime activity. But before you start picturing idyllic fjords and happy Norse families, remember that the Viking Age was pretty much a get-rich-or-die-trying enterprise. They weren't just raiders. They were traders, explorers, and yes, slave owners. Thralls were the unsung, unpaid workforce, making up as much as 10% of the population. Think of them as the unfortunate backbone of Viking prosperity, captured in raids from places like the British Isles or the coasts of France. If you were caught in one of these raids, congratulations, you just won a one-way ticket to a life of servitude. How did you end up here, you ask? Well, it all starts with a Viking raid. Those business trips that were less about collecting frequent flyer miles and more about looting, pillaging, and you guessed it, capturing slaves. Forget about being a valuable asset. You were more like inventory. And in this twisted market, humans were often considered less valuable than livestock. You might fetch a lower price than a well-fed cow. Now, that's a blow to the ego. Once you were captured, you'd be packed off to a market, maybe in Dublin or Hedeby, like a Scandinavian swap meet, but with more chains and less haggling. Here, thralls were traded like commodities. Imagine the indignity of standing next to a goat, both of you being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Your new owner, a Viking farmer or chieftain, might buy you for the equivalent of a few silver coins, cheap labor to till the fields, tend to the livestock, or even row the longships. If you were really lucky, you might end up as a house thrall, which is like winning the thrall lottery. Viking society was a brutal meritocracy, but not for you. As a thrall, you weren't climbing any social ladders. You were more like the ladder itself, supporting everyone else's climb. Your value was utilitarian, not personal. While your Viking overlords were out trading furs and amber, you were back at the homestead, making sure the place didn't fall apart. And if your owner decided to set you free, you became a freedman. But don't get too excited. Freedom in Viking society came with its own set of strings. The irony here is worth noting. While the Vikings are remembered for their fierce independence and exploration, their society was built on the backs of those who had none. In the sagas, it's the warriors who get the glory, but in reality, it was the nameless, voiceless thralls who kept the Viking world turning. The sagas might sing of heroes, but they are silent on the thrall standing in the shadows, holding the torch. So, the next time you hear about the daring Viking raids, remember the thralls who were the unsung victims of those adventures. These were the people who, against their will, fueled the economy of one of history's most romanticized cultures. It's a reminder that even the most thrilling tales have their dark undercurrents. The Vikings might have been great storytellers, but they were also experts at leaving the inconvenient bits out of the story. And as you settle into your role in this world, you can't help but wonder if those sagas would have been a bit different if the thralls had ever had a chance to tell their side. Of course, while those sagas unfurl tales of adventure and triumph, the gritty day-to-day life of a Viking thrall would make even the most hardened Skald think twice before penning an epic. So let's dive into the nitty-gritty of thrall life, because if you thought a longship cruise was cramped, wait till you hear about their living quarters. Cue the longhouse, the archetypal Viking abode. Now, if you're picturing a cozy log cabin with a roaring fire and a view of the fjords, think again. The longhouse was more like the Viking version of a sardine can, minus the luxury of personal space. You'd be sharing this space not just with your fellow thralls, but likely with the family of your owner, their livestock, and perhaps a few rats if you're lucky. With that kind of crowd, let's just say privacy wasn't a top priority. The air was thick with smoke from the central hearth, and the fragrant bouquet of livestock didn't exactly scream, "Home, sweet home." Conditions were, in a word, basic. Imagine a dirt floor that doubles as your bed and a roof that leaks like it's auditioning to be a sieve. You'd be crammed into a dark corner, maybe on a straw mat if you were lucky, and if you dared to dream, perhaps a threadbare blanket. Think of it as minimalist living, Viking style. And in winter, when the Nordic cold became a relentless houseguest, those walls offered as much protection as a wet paper towel. Yet, while the romanticized image of Viking life might include hardy feasts and epic tales sung by the fire, for thralls, it was more about making sure the fire didn't go out and the livestock didn't freeze. Then there's the labor. If you thought your modern 9-to-5 was tough, welcome to the relentless grind of a thrall's existence. Picture yourself toiling away from sunrise to sundown with a schedule more jam-packed than a modern CEO's calendar. Your daily tasks might include slaving away in the fields, maintaining the homestead, or crafting tools and goods that your Viking overlords would later trade for shiny trinkets or more livestock. You were the engine in a society that was all about expansion and trade, and your blood, sweat, and tears were the fuel. Let's talk agriculture. Scandinavia's climate wasn't exactly conducive to easy farming. The growing season was short, the soil often rocky and stubborn. Think of it as farming on hard mode. But thralls were expected to make it work. They did, ploughing fields with tools that made even the Flintstones look high-tech. They cultivated barley, rye, and oats, putting the hard in hardy grains. And while the Viking chieftains might have been dreaming of distant shores, it was the thralls who ensured there was enough food to keep the longships stocked for those journeys. And lest we forget, the thralls' craftsmanship. It was their skillful hands that crafted the tools, weapons, and everyday items that defined Viking life. A thrall might spend hours weaving, smithing, or woodworking, often with skills honed from whatever life they had before being captured. Yet, for all their contributions, they received little recognition, their work uncredited in the sagas that immortalized their masters' deeds. Now, here's where it gets economically intriguing. Thralls were an essential cog in the Viking economic machine. Their labor allowed Viking society to thrive, facilitating trade routes that spanned from the British Isles to the Silk Road. The economy was booming not just because of the raiding and trading, but because thralls were keeping the home fires burning, quite literally. Yet, despite their crucial role, thralls were considered property. No rights, no prospects, and certainly no negotiating for better working conditions. Their value was strictly utilitarian, produce or perish. Consider the sheer scale of Viking trade, which relied heavily on the goods produced by thralls. From furs to iron, the spoils of the Viking world were not just the result of conquest, but of relentless labor. It's a grim irony that a culture so celebrated for its freedom and exploration was so dependent on a vast, invisible workforce bound by chains. So the next time you find yourself swept up in the romantic allure of Viking culture, remember the unseen hands that built its foundations. Those longhouses might have hosted legendary feasts and heroic tales, but they also echoed with the silent toil of thralls who lived and labored in the shadows. And as you ponder this Viking paradox, keep in mind that even the most storied past has its unsung heroes. The thralls were the silent architects of a golden age, their stories untold in the grand narrative, but etched into every field ploughed and every tool crafted. Theirs was a life of relentless toil, an unending day in the life of a Viking thrall. But what really cemented the thrall's place at the bottom of the Viking food chain was the legal framework that wrapped around their existence like a straitjacket made of ironclad laws. Viking society, for all its reputation as a wild, untamed frontier of seafaring glory, was actually pretty big on rules, and not the fun, pirate code kind. We're talking about a system where social standing was as rigid as a Norse longship's mast, and just as unforgiving. Now, if you were a free man, or better yet, a chieftain, congratulations. You were part of the elite club with rights and privileges that made life feel like a perpetual feast in Valhalla. But as a thrall, you might as well have been an afterthought in the legal scrolls of Viking law. The society was sharply divided into three classes: the Jarls, the Carls, and, bringing up the rear, the thralls. Think of the Jarls as the aristocracy, the Carls as the everyday working folk, and the thralls as, well, the walking, talking property. The concept of wergild is a perfect example of how these laws kept everyone in their place. Wergild, or man price, was essentially the value placed on a person's life. It was like a grim, medieval insurance policy, ensuring that if someone decided to end your days prematurely, their family would owe yours a tidy sum. A noble might have a wergild worth many pounds of silver, while a free farmer was worth less. But a thrall, their wergild was next to nothing. If you were a thrall, and someone decided to take you out with their battle axe, the compensation your owner received would barely cover the cost of a decent pair of boots. This wasn't just about economics. It was a stark reminder of your place in the social pecking order. Your life, in legal terms, was worth less than that of the livestock you tended. So, while the Viking warriors were out earning glory and gold, the thralls were back home, their lives insured for less than the family goat. Now, let's talk about the few narrow escape routes out of this servitude nightmare. Because believe it or not, there was a slim chance, about as slim as a Viking sword edge, that a thrall could earn their freedom. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't common, but it did happen. One path to freedom was through the benevolence of your owner. If you were particularly skilled or had managed to worm your way into the good graces of your master, they might grant you freedom. This wasn't done out of kindness, mind you, but more as a reward for exceptional service, like an ancient version of an Employee of the Month award, only instead of a plaque, you got your life back. Another way was through earning enough to buy your freedom. That's right, if you managed to squirrel away enough silver, perhaps through selling your own crafts or saving the meager allowances some owners might give, you could purchase your release. This was about as easy as rowing a longship against the tide, but it was possible. And let's face it, the prospect of buying your own freedom in a society that valued you less than a sheep is the height of irony. And then there were the loopholes, the rare and lucky breaks. In some Viking territories, laws allowed for a thrall to be freed if they married a free person. Of course, the social stigma and legal hurdles made this a long shot, but it was there, a glimmer of hope in a world that offered very little. Yet, even if a thrall managed to claw their way to freedom, they were never truly free. The social stigma lingered like a ghost at a feast. Freed thralls or freedmen were caught in a perpetual limbo, not quite accepted as equals by the freeborn. The society that thrived on exploration and conquest wasn't quite ready to explore the idea of true equality. So here's the kicker. Viking society, as adventurous and bold as it was, relied heavily on laws and customs that kept people in their place. The tales of daring and discovery conveniently gloss over the legal and social frameworks that made sure everyone knew their station. And while the sagas sung of warriors and guards, the real stories of the thralls, their struggles, their rare triumphs, and their unending toil were left unsung. As we continue to unravel this tapestry of Viking life, it becomes clear that the romanticized vision of fearless explorers sailing into the unknown is only part of the story. The reality was a society built on a foundation of inequality, where the law was as much a weapon as any axe or sword. And as you ponder these harsh truths, remember that even the grandest legends have their shadowy corners, where the voices of the forgotten echo, demanding to be heard. All right, let's set sail into the nitty-gritty of Viking business practices. And by business, I mean the kind of ruthless capitalism that makes Wall Street look like a charity bake sale. Time to unpack the raiding and trading world where human lives were just another commodity in the Viking marketplace. Welcome to the brutal reality of Viking slavery. When you think of Viking raids, you might picture fearsome warriors storming English monasteries and sailing back home with chests of gold. What you might not picture are the thralls, those unlucky souls captured in these raids, who were as much a part of the loot as the silver goblets. The Vikings were like the Amazon of the medieval world, except instead of 2-day shipping, they offered one-way trips to a life of servitude. These raids weren't just about plunder. They were about stocking up on thralls to fuel their economy. It was a supply and demand system where the demand for labor was insatiable, and the supply was, well, whoever was unfortunate enough to get caught. Let's talk about the slave markets that dotted Europe like dark constellations on a map. Take Dublin, for instance, which wasn't just a quaint Irish city, but a bustling hub of human trafficking. Dublin was the go-to place for Viking chieftains looking to offload their latest batch of captives. It was a grim marketplace where human lives were bartered alongside cattle and grain. Here, thralls were sold in markets that resembled a medieval stock exchange, except the stakes were a bit higher than your average stock portfolio. You might have found yourself standing on an auction block, sold to the highest bidder, who could be anyone from a local farmer to a wealthy noble. Now, let's navigate the trade routes that made this grim enterprise possible. The Vikings were master mariners, their longships slicing through the seas like well-honed blades. These ships weren't just for pillaging, they were the arteries of a vast trade network. Picture the Volga trade network, a sprawling route that stretched from Scandinavia to the Byzantine Empire and beyond. The Volga was like the Viking Silk Road, a conduit for goods, ideas, and, unfortunately, human lives. This route wasn't all about fur and amber. It was also about moving thralls from one end of Europe to the other. The Vikings had trade partnerships that would make any modern CEO jealous. They dealt with the Abbasid Caliphate, exchanging Nordic furs for silver coins minted in Baghdad. These coins weren't just currency. They were symbols of the Vikings' far-reaching influence, proof that their voyages weren't just for show. And let's not forget the Byzantines, who found the Norsemen to be both a menace and a trading partner. The Byzantine emperors even hired Viking mercenaries, the Varangian Guard, proving that even in a world of cutthroat economics, everyone needed a little security. This brings us to the cultural exchanges that happened alongside these business transactions. The Vikings were not xenophobic. They were cultural sponges, soaking up customs and ideas from the lands they traded with. When they weren't busy raiding, they were learning new ways to brew beer or craft weaponry, blending these influences into their own culture. But let's not romanticize this too much. These exchanges were often one-sided, with thralls bearing the brunt of cultural assimilation. They were stripped of their identities, forced to adapt to new masters, new lands, and new gods. And here's where we bust another myth. The Vikings weren't just noble explorers on a quest for glory. They were also savvy businessmen who understood the power dynamics of their time. Their raids were meticulously planned economic ventures, not just mindless violence. They knew which monasteries were rich and which towns were ripe for plundering. It was less about the thrill of the raid and more about the profit margin. In this world, thralls were the currency that kept the Viking economy afloat. But these economic pursuits were not without tension. The influx of Viking traders and slavers into European markets fueled resentment and resistance. The Frankish and Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, tired of being the Vikings' favorite shopping destinations, began to fortify their coasts and bolster their defenses. These tensions culminated in battles and treaties, with the Vikings often playing both sides to their advantage. They were the ultimate opportunists, striking deals when it suited them and wielding axes when it didn't. So, while the sagas glorify the fearless Viking warriors, the reality was a bit more complex. Beneath the tales of heroism lay an economic system built on exploitation and human suffering. The Vikings were less about the glory of battle and more about the bottom line. Their legacy is a tapestry of cultural exchange, economic savvy, and brutal pragmatism. They were both the merchants of the medieval world and its marauders, straddling the line between civilization and chaos. As we navigate these historical waters, remember that the Viking story isn't just one of adventure. It's a narrative of economic power, cultural exchange, and the harsh realities of a world where human lives were commodities to be traded and exploited. And as we move forward, we'll continue to uncover the layers of this complex society, where the myth of the noble Viking is as much a product of their own storytelling as it is of later historians seeking heroes in an age of darkness. So, While the Vikings' reputation sails on the winds of saga and song, it's worth noting that these seafaring entrepreneurs knew how to play a long game. But even the most ironclad economic systems have their Achilles heel. Enter Christianity, the unexpected disruptor that would slowly but surely sink the ship of Viking slavery. You see, when Christianity began its northward march across Europe, it didn't just bring new guards, it brought an entirely new moral compass. And this compass pointed decidedly away from the practice of owning people like livestock. Let's rewind to the 9th century, when the first whispers of Christianity began to tickle Viking ears. At first, it was just a mild curiosity, a foreign faith practiced by those strange folks to the south who didn't seem to appreciate a good raid. But as the decades rolled on, Christianity's influence grew like moss on a sun-starved fjord. By the 10th and 11th centuries, it was less a whisper and more a full-blown choir, with Scandinavian kings like Olaf Tryggvason and Harold Bluetooth converting and using their newfound faith as a political tool. This wasn't just a spiritual awakening. It was about consolidating power and uniting fractured territories under a single banner. And here's where things get interesting. Christianity didn't just change the gods people prayed to. It reshaped the legal and moral frameworks of society. The Christian doctrine was a bit of a buzzkill for the whole slavery gig. Teachings about mercy, equality, and the inherent worth of every soul weren't just theological niceties. They were social dynamite. The idea that everyone, even a lowly thrall, had a place in the divine plan was revolutionary, and it began to erode the cultural norms that kept Viking slavery afloat. Let's talk concrete changes. In Norway, for example, King Magnus the Good in the 11th century began implementing Christian laws that frowned upon slavery like a Viking frowning upon a weak ale. These laws weren't just a suggestion, they were a mandate. And while slavery didn't vanish overnight, the legal protections for thralls began to strengthen. You could feel the social tectonics shifting beneath the Viking world. The very concept of man price began to lose its grip as new laws emphasized fines and compensations that favored reconciliation over retribution. And it wasn't just the laws that changed. The very fabric of Viking society began to unravel and reweave itself. As Christianity spread, brought along its baggage of monastic schools, literacy, and a written record of laws and histories, something the Vikings hadn't exactly prioritized while they were busy carving runes and raiding coastlines. This influx of education and literacy meant that the stories being told began to shift. The sagas, once filled with tales of divine warriors and epic battles, began to make room for less glamorous but more human stories. Stories that sometimes whispered of the thrall's plight. Now, let's not get too carried away with the idea of a quick and clean transition. The decline of slavery was less of a dramatic shipwreck and more of a slow, creaking dismantling. The Vikings didn't just wake up one day, slap their foreheads, and decide that slavery was so yesterday. The transformation was gradual, like a glacier carving its way through rock. Economic factors played a role too, as European trade networks expanded and the economy evolved. The reliance on forced labor became less practical. Why keep thralls when you could pay a freeman and avoid the moral hangover? But here's the kicker. Even as slavery began its slow fade, the myth of the glorious Viking age persisted, polished by the gloss of time and storytelling. The Vikings managed to keep their image as noble warriors intact, conveniently omitting the complexities of their social fabric. While the sagas continued to glorify the raids and the heroes who led them, they overlooked the unsung architects of their society, the thralls who had shouldered the burden of Viking prosperity with their silent toil. This brings us to the enduring legacy of the Vikings, a legacy that's as much about what we choose to remember as it is about what actually happened. The romantic allure of the Viking warrior, with his axe and longship, remains a captivating image. But let's not forget the shadows lurking beneath those ships, the stories untold. As Christianity swept through Scandinavia, it didn't just alter the spiritual landscape. It redefined what it meant to be a part of that society. The Viking story is not just one of conquest and exploration, but also one of transformation and adaptation. So, what's the takeaway from this saga of swords and salvation? Simply put, it's a reminder that history is a complex beast, a tangle of myth and reality that we must unravel with care. The Vikings were not just the marauding warriors of legend. They were also shrewd economists and reluctant participants in a changing world. Their story is one of evolution, both social and spiritual, where the old ways were slowly replaced by new beliefs and values. And while the sagas speak of heroes and guards, the true legacy of the Viking Age includes the voices of those who lived in its shadows, voices that remind us of the complexity and depth of human history. As you drift off with these tales of the past echoing in your mind, remember that the stories we tell are as important as the stories we forget. The Vikings may have been masters of the sea, but the true measure of their legacy lies in the way they navigated the tides of change, steering their society into new waters with a steady hand on the tiller of history. Now that's a historical lesson worth staying awake for. The year is 376 AD, and you're sitting in the bustling heart of the Roman Empire, a place that feels like it's seen it all: emperors and gladiators, conquests and betrayals. But these days, something's off. The grandeur of Rome isn't shining as brightly as it used to, and you can feel the tension in the air like the humidity before a storm. The empire's got a lot on its plate, and it's not just the bread and circuses. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the two elephants, the Eastern and Western Roman empires. This split was like a messy divorce, leaving both sides trying to figure out who gets what. Diocletian, crafty as ever, decided back in 285 to divide the empire, thinking it would be easier to manage. Little did he know it was a bit like trying to run a marathon with two left feet. The East, with its rich cities like Constantinople, was living it up. Meanwhile, the West, including Rome itself, was left grappling with economic woes and a barbarian problem that was quickly becoming the talk of the town. The Western Empire was like that one friend who always seems to be borrowing money but never quite gets back on their feet. Inflation was skyrocketing faster than a chariot in a horse race. Coins were losing their value faster than you could say denarius, and if you were a farmer, you were probably wishing you'd picked a different career. High taxes and corrupted officials siphoning off anything they could get their hands on were driving people to the brink. You might have heard grumblings in the marketplace about how the rich were getting richer, while everyone else was lucky to keep their sandals from falling apart. Now, about that political scene. If you thought modern politics was a mess, Roman politics would have you reaching for a glass of wine, preferably the strong stuff. Corruption was as common as a toga, with senators and emperors alike more concerned with personal gain than the empire's welfare. Emperors were coming and going faster than a revolving door, with assassinations and coups becoming a regular part of life. You never knew who might end up on the throne next, and frankly, you were just hoping it wouldn't be someone who'd bankrupt the empire before breakfast. And let's not forget the borders, which were about as secure as a sandcastle at high tide. The Goths, a particularly tenacious group, were knocking at the empire's door, and they weren't bringing welcome gifts. In 376 they showed up along the Danube, looking for asylum from the Huns, who were busy being their usual terrifying selves. The Romans, always up for a challenge, decided to let them in. After all, what could possibly go wrong? Spoiler alert. A lot went wrong. The Goths were treated poorly, extorted by corrupt officials, and eventually they decided they'd had enough. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 saw the Romans getting their behinds handed to them, and the Goths weren't exactly apologetic about it. So here you are, a Roman citizen, watching the world around you change at a pace that makes your head spin. You're surrounded by a crumbling infrastructure, a currency that's worth less than the clay it's minted on, and political leaders who couldn't find their way out of a forum. But hey, at least the bread's still cheap, right? For now, you're just trying to keep your head above water, hoping that the empire can somehow pull itself together before it's too late. Because if history tells us anything, it's that Rome wasn't built in a day. But it sure seems like it could fall apart in one. But hey, who needs a solid empire when you have a front row seat to one of history's most dramatic plot twists? Enter the Goths, stage left. They weren't just crashing the empire's party. They were about to change the rules of the game. You see, the Goths had arrived at the Danube's doorstep in 376 AD like a family seeking refuge, except this family was more like a collective of tribes, and their baggage included a whole lot of weapons. Now, let's set the stage for the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, a showdown that would make any Hollywood blockbuster look like a Sunday picnic. Picture this: the Goths, led by their chieftain Fridigon, had already been pushed to the edge by Roman officials who treated them worse than your average tax collector. So, when the opportunity came to stand up against their oppressors, they seized it with both hands and a few swords. The Roman Emperor Valens, stationed in the east, figured he'd squash this rebellion quickly. After all, he had an empire to run and a reputation to maintain. But here's a hot tip. Never underestimate an opponent who's got nothing left to lose. Valens marched his troops out of Constantinople, a city that was more interested in its next chariot race than military strategy, with confidence as his co-pilot. However, he soon found out that confidence without a plan is just arrogance on a suicide mission. The Romans, in their infinite wisdom, decided to engage the Goths without waiting for reinforcements from the Western Empire. It's like showing up to a bar fight with a butter knife while your friends are still parking the car. Valens believed he was facing a small, disorganized band of rebels. Spoiler alert, he was wrong. The Goths weren't just a ragtag group of warriors. They had cavalry and a solid battle plan. Fridigon, ever the strategist, used the terrain to his advantage, setting up his forces on a hill, with wagons forming a makeshift fortification. It was a move right out of the military playbook, and Valens walked right into it. On August 9, 378 AD, the battle commenced under a blazing sun that would have had sunscreen companies salivating if they'd existed. The Romans, wearing their signature armor, which was more for show than practicality in the heat, charged at the Goths. But as they closed in, the Goth cavalry swooped in from the flanks like a hawk descending on its prey. The Roman legions, known for their discipline, found themselves in chaos. Imagine a marching band suddenly asked to perform a rock concert. It wasn't pretty. The Goth strategy was simple yet effective. Draw the Romans in, spread them thin, and then crush them with overwhelming force. The Roman left flank crumbled first, a domino effect that sent panic rippling through the ranks. Valens, seeing his army disintegrate, tried to rally his men, but it was like trying to plug a sinking ship with a wine cork. And speaking of wine, the Goths were probably toasting their unexpected victory with whatever they could find. By the end of the day, the Roman army was decimated, and Emperor Valens was nowhere to be found. Some say he died in battle. Others believe he might have made a last-ditch attempt to flee. Either way, Valens became a grim reminder that assuming victory is the first step to defeat. The Romans lost roughly two-thirds of their army, about 20,000 men, which was a catastrophic blow. Meanwhile, the Goths, once seen as mere barbarian rabble, had proven themselves to be a formidable force. The Battle of Adrianople was more than just a military defeat. It was a seismic shift in power dynamics. The myth of Roman invincibility was shattered like a dropped amphora, leaving citizens to question everything they thought they knew about their empire's strength. For the average Roman, this meant re-evaluating survival strategies. Gone were the days when the empire's borders felt like a protective wall. Now, they seemed more like a sieve, letting in all manner of threats. Economically, the empire was already on shaky ground, and this defeat only deepened the cracks. Resources that could have been used to rebuild were instead funneled into a military machine that was rapidly losing its edge. The silver denarius, once a symbol of Roman might, was now as valuable as a handful of pebbles. Inflation soared, leaving citizens clutching their purses tighter than ever before. Socially, the defeat at Adrianople was a wake-up call. People began to question the leadership, or lack thereof, of their rulers. If the emperor couldn't defend the empire, what hope did ordinary citizens have? The political scene, already a circus of incompetence and corruption, became even more volatile. Assassinations and coups were on the rise, as power-hungry individuals vied for control of a crumbling legacy. In the aftermath, the Romans were forced to reconsider their approach to foreign policy. No longer could they afford to see the world in black and white, Romans versus barbarians. Goths had shown they were more than capable of standing toe-to-toe with the might of Rome, and this realization left many feeling vulnerable. Survival now meant adapting to a new reality, one where alliances might need to be forged with former enemies. The Battle of Adrianople marked a turning point, not just for the Roman military, but for the empire as a whole. It was a lesson in humility, a reminder that no empire, no matter how grand, is immune to the tides of change. As the dust settled, Roman citizens were left to ponder their future in a world that felt a lot less certain than it had the day before. And while the empire itself might have been down, it wasn't out. Not yet, anyway. The story of Rome was far from over, but the next chapters would be written in a different ink, one colored by the hard truths of a new era. As Roman citizens picked up the pieces after Adrianople, the empire found itself teetering on the edge of a new reality. The average Roman's daily life was a mix of adaptation and survival, an ongoing game of historical dodgeball where the stakes were as high as the Colosseum's arches. The empire's once mighty trade routes, which had been the lifeblood of its economy, now faced more disruptions than a pantomime during Saturnalia. The Goths, Vandals, and a whole host of other tribes didn't just bring their swords and spears. They also introduced a fresh set of headaches for Roman merchants. Trade, the very engine of Roman prosperity, began to sputter. Imagine trying to sell silk from China or spices from India when every road is a potential ambush waiting to happen. The famed Roman roads, stretching approximately 50,000 miles, were more like a high-stakes obstacle course now. With the Goths controlling vast swaths of land, traders had to get creative, rerouting caravans and shipments through safer, albeit longer, paths. Of course, this meant higher costs and delays, as if the guards themselves were playing a cruel joke on anyone trying to make a living. Speaking of currency, if you thought the value of a denarius was plummeting before, post-Adrianople it was in free fall. Inflation was the name of the game, and it felt like every coin was worth its weight in hot air. The Roman government, in a bid to stabilize things, decided to debase the currency even further, reducing the silver content in coins. By the end of the 4th century, a coin that once held 90% silver was now lucky to contain 5%. In economic terms, this was like trying to plug a leaky barrel with a piece of wet parchment. The impact on daily life was palpable. Prices for everyday goods skyrocketed, and bartering became the new norm. Forget about buying that nice amphora for your wine. Now you were more concerned with trading a sack of grain for a couple of goats, assuming you could find someone willing to make the exchange. The pinch of poverty wasn't just something you read about in dusty scrolls. It was the uncomfortable reality for many Romans. In cities, people flocked to markets with whatever they could spare, hoping to find a fair trade amid the chaos. But amidst the turmoil, cultural exchanges were happening, whether the Romans liked it or not. The so-called barbarians brought more than just conflict. They introduced new customs, ideas, and even goods. The Romans, pragmatic as ever, began adopting certain aspects of these cultures. Gothic fashions, for instance, found their way into Roman wardrobes, with tunics and cloaks becoming all the rage. It was a strange fusion of practicality and style, with some Romans sporting a look that was half senator, half Goth. In terms of food, the Roman diet saw an infusion of flavors, as the invaders introduced new ingredients and cooking techniques. Suddenly, dishes were spiced with more than just salt, and the palate of the Roman citizen was broadened, albeit sometimes begrudgingly. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about adapting and thriving in changing times. As for the practical adaptations, Romans were nothing if not resourceful. Cities that had once been open to the world now became fortress-like, with thick walls and watchtowers dotting the landscape. The classic Roman villa was reinforced, not just with stone, but with a renewed sense of purpose. It was a return to the basics, a back-to-the-wall approach that required cooperation and community. Negotiating peace deals became an art form, a delicate dance of diplomacy where words were as sharp as swords. Roman leaders, realizing that perpetual war was unsustainable, began engaging with tribal leaders, offering land and titles in exchange for peace, and at times, military support. It was a pragmatic move, a recognition that alliances were as valuable as legions. This blending of cultures and politics created a patchwork quilt of allegiances, with Romans and Goths sometimes fighting side by side against other threats. Yet, for all the upheaval, there was resilience. The Roman spirit, though battered, was not broken. Citizens found ways to cope with the new normal, whether it was through small acts of defiance or grand gestures of ingenuity. The empire might have been losing its grip, but the people within it were finding new ways to hold on. It was a testament to human adaptability, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, life finds a way to endure. As Romans navigated this turbulent period, they were living in a world that was both familiar and utterly transformed. The grandeur of the past was still visible, like the fading colors of a fresco, but the future was uncertain, painted with the bold strokes of change. The stage was set for the next act in Rome's history, a story still unfolding, with its citizens as both actors and audience in a drama that would echo through the ages. As Romans navigated this turbulent period, they were living in a world that was both familiar and utterly transformed. The grandeur of the past was still visible, like the fading colors of a fresco, but the future was uncertain, painted with the bold strokes of change. And speaking of change, let's dive into the rise of charismatic leaders who tried to keep this Roman ship from capsizing entirely. Enter Stilicho, the half-barbarian, half-Roman general who became the empire's last great hope, or at least a decent one. Stilicho was like the ultimate crossover character, with a Vandal father and a Roman mother, making him a living bridge between two worlds that usually preferred to meet over the clashing of swords. He was the Magister Militum, which is a fancy way of saying he was the top military honcho in the Western Empire around the turn of the 5th century. This guy had about as much pressure on him as a clay amphora in a room full of clumsy senators. Stilicho's strategy was all about alliances, a word that might have been Latin for hug it out before you slug it out. See, he recognized that Rome couldn't go it alone against the hordes of Goths, Vandals, and other assorted tribes knocking at the door. So, he did what any sensible leader would. He married his daughter off to the Emperor Honorius. Ah, Roman politics, where family dinners could double as diplomatic negotiations. But Stilicho's political prowess didn't just stop at marriages. He managed to broker deals with the Visigoths, led by the formidable Alaric, in an attempt to keep them on side, or at least not on the warpath. Alaric, a name that would soon become infamous in Rome's history books, was like that neighbor who's always borrowing your lawnmower but never returning it in one piece. Except in this case, the lawnmower was a metaphor for territory and military support. Now, Stilicho wasn't just about peace treaties and wedding bells. He was also quite the military tactician. In 402 AD, he faced down a Gothic invasion in northern Italy at the Battle of Palencia. Stilicho, with his commanding presence and a knack for battlefield maneuvers, managed to pull off a victory that sent Gothic forces into retreat. His success was a rare bright spot for the Western Empire, and if there had been social media back then, his hashtag would have been trending in no time. Despite these victories, Stilicho's life was far from a Roman holiday. His position was precarious, balancing on the knife edge of Roman politics. The Emperor Honorius, who had all the leadership skills of a sun-baked statue, was easily swayed by whispers of court conspiracies. And as it goes with anything that involves power, envy and betrayal were lurking in the shadows. In 408 AD, Stilicho was accused of treason, a charge as popular then as reality TV is now, and executed. His death marked the end of an era where there was at least a semblance of control over the chaos. With Stilicho gone, the Western Empire found itself leaderless and vulnerable, like a turtle flipped on its back. The Visigoths, seeing opportunity in the confusion, ramped up their pressure on Roman territories. This culminated in the infamous sack of Rome in 410 AD, when Alaric and his merry band of Goths decided to give the Eternal City a makeover, one that involved a lot of fire and looting. For the Romans, it was a bit like watching your favorite restaurant burn down while you're waiting to be served. Now, let's not forget about Aetius, another Roman general who stepped into the spotlight a few years later. Known as the last of the Romans, Aetius was a master of the art of war and the kind of guy who could probably negotiate peace between cats and dogs. He wasn't just a military leader. He was a political juggernaut who understood that the key to survival was, you guessed it, alliances. Aetius spent part of his youth as a hostage with the Huns, which in Roman terms was like going to the school of hard knocks. He learned their ways, their strategies, and probably how to stomach their fermented mare's milk. This experience proved invaluable when he later faced Attila the Hun, the so-called Scourge of God, in battle. Aetius managed to broker peace with the Huns on multiple occasions, proving that sometimes diplomacy is the best armor. In 451 AD, Aetius faced off against Attila at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. This was one of those epic confrontations that historians love to romanticize, a clash of titans where the fate of Western civilization seemed to hang in the balance. Aetius, with a coalition of Romans, Visigoths, and other allies, managed to halt Attila's advance. It was a rare victory for the Romans, and Aetius was hailed as a hero, if only for a moment. However, Roman politics being what they were, an endless cycle of backstabbing and intrigue, Aetius's glory was short-lived. In 454 AD, he was assassinated by Emperor Valentinian Roman III, who was about as stable as a two-legged table. This assassination was a classic case of no good deed goes unpunished, and it left the Western Empire floundering without its best general. So, what did all these leadership changes mean for the average Roman citizen? Well, it was a bit like living in a house where the roof kept blowing off every time you fixed it. These charismatic leaders, for all their military skill and political acumen, were temporary fixes at best. The Roman Empire was a sinking ship, and while leaders like Stilicho and Aetius managed to bail out some water, the holes were just too big. For everyday Romans, survival became a matter of adaptation. The empire's military, once the pride of Rome, was now a shadow of its former self. Economic instability was the new norm, with currency fluctuations that made today's stock market look like a walk in the park. Landowners had to become more self-sufficient, while urban dwellers relied on a barter system that was as unpredictable as Roman weather. Culturally, the impact of these leadership changes was profound. Roman identity, once distinct and proud, began to blur with the influx of different cultures and customs. The line between Roman and barbarian became increasingly faint, as alliances and marriages mingled bloodlines and traditions. Roman art, literature, and architecture began to reflect this hybridization, creating a melting pot that was both innovative and contentious. Yet, amid all this turmoil, one thing was clear: Rome's legacy was far from over. The seeds planted by these leaders, whether through military might or diplomatic finesse, would continue to influence the course of history. The fall of Rome wasn't a simple collapse. It was a transformation, a metamorphosis that would shape the medieval world and beyond. As we look at this tumultuous period, it's easy to get lost in the chaos and forget the human stories that played out on this grand stage. These charismatic leaders, with their victories and failures, were part of a larger narrative, a narrative of survival, adaptation, and resilience. So, while the Roman Empire as it was known may have crumbled, its spirit, its influence, and its lessons would endure, echoing through the halls of history long after the dust had settled. And so, we find ourselves at the tail end of the Western Roman Empire's swan song, a swan that's looking a bit bedraggled, if we're being honest. It's 476 AD, and if you thought the Empire's troubles were over, well, the guards have news for you. The Western Empire, once the powerhouse of the ancient world, is now sputtering out like a candle in a drafty villa. In the spotlight is Romulus Augustulus, the last Roman emperor in the West, who ascended to the throne as a teenager, barely old enough to grow a decent beard, let alone manage an empire on life support. His reign, if you can call it that, was more a footnote than a chapter, lasting less than a year. His name, evoking the legendary founder of Rome, was about as ironic as a broken aqueduct in a drought. Now, let's talk about Odoacer, Germanic leader who decided it was time for a career change from soldier to kingmaker. In September 476, Odoacer did Rome a solid by deposing young Romulus without much fuss. Instead of the expected bloodbath, it was more like handing in your toga and getting a nice severance package. Romulus was sent off to live comfortably in Campania, because why execute when you can exile with a view? Odoacer didn't bother with the pretense of Roman titles. No emperor for him. He was content with King of Italy, a title that suited him like a well-tailored tunic. This was less about smashing the Roman legacy and more about acknowledging the obvious. The Western Empire was already as fractured as a mosaic dropped from a great height. The fall of the Western Roman Empire wasn't the grand cataclysm that Hollywood might have you believe. Instead, it was the slow, inexorable decline of an institution that had stretched itself thinner than a Roman senator's patience with a tax collector. Decades of internal corruption, economic disarray, and military overextension had left the empire vulnerable. The real surprise isn't that it fell, it's that it lasted as long as it did. Economically, the Western Roman Empire was about as stable as a three-legged stool. By 476, the denarius was more of a suggestion than a currency, its value eroded by relentless debasement. The empire, once a vast economic network, had become a patchwork of self-sufficient estates, each more interested in local survival than imperial unity. Trade had dwindled to a trickle as roads crumbled and sea routes became the playgrounds of pirates. The political landscape was a veritable minefield of shifting allegiances, with power being the ultimate currency. The Senate, once a bastion of Roman governance, had turned into more of a retirement club for elites who'd rather debate the merits of wine vintages than deal with barbarians at the gates. Socially, the fall marked a turning point. For Roman citizens, it was a time of adaptation, where survival meant embracing the inevitability of change. The line between Roman and barbarian blurred further, and many Romans found themselves adopting the ways of their former foes, a pragmatic move if ever there was one. The mixing of cultures brought about by these invasions led to a fusion of traditions, languages, and even religions, a medieval melting pot that would eventually shape the Europe we know. But let's not romanticize this transition. The so-called Dark Ages were aptly named for their turmoil and uncertainty. Life for the average person was challenging, with the comforts of Roman civilization becoming distant memories. Infrastructure collapsed faster than a poorly built Roman arch, and once thriving cities became ghost towns. The Pax Romana, that long period of relative peace and stability, was a distant echo, replaced by a world where a strong arm and a sharper sword were your best allies. Yet in the midst of this upheaval, the Roman legacy endured. The administrative frameworks, legal systems, and even the Latin language itself would serve as the foundation for the burgeoning medieval kingdoms. The Catholic Church, a product of Roman times, became a beacon of continuity and stability, preserving knowledge through the monasteries that dotted the landscape like oases of learning in a desert of ignorance. The fall of the Western Empire was not the end of Rome's influence, but a metamorphosis. While the Western Roman Empire might have crumbled, the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive for another 1,000 years, a testament to the adaptability and resilience that were hallmarks of Roman culture. This brings us to the long-term impact of Roman survival tactics. The Romans excelled at taking what worked and making it their own, whether it was military strategies from the Greeks or architectural innovations from the Etruscans. This adaptability was passed down, influencing the political and social structures of medieval Europe. The idea of a centralized state, a legacy of Roman governance, found new life in the feudal systems that emerged, albeit in a more fragmented form. And let's not forget Roman law, which laid the groundwork for many modern legal systems. The notion that laws should be written and accessible to all citizens was revolutionary and enduring, a direct line from the 12 tables to today's legal codes. So, as we wrap up this grand tour of Rome's decline and the dawn of the medieval age, let's debunk a few myths. The fall of Rome wasn't a sudden, fiery apocalypse, but a gradual, messy process, like watching a beloved but outdated theater company slowly close its doors. And despite the romantic imagery of valiant last stands and noble defeats, the reality was far more mundane. A series of compromises, adaptations, and survival tactics that, while less glamorous, were far more significant. The enduring human spirit, that relentless drive to adapt and endure, was the true legacy of the Roman Empire. It's a reminder that history isn't just about empires and epic battles. It's about the people who lived through them, who found ways to keep going even when the world seemed to be falling apart around them. The Romans might not have known it, but their legacy would echo through history, testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the human spirit. So next time you find yourself staring at the ruins of a once great empire, remember, every stone, every column, tells a story of survival and transformation. The Western Roman Empire might have faded into history, but its spirit lives on, woven into the very fabric of our modern world. Now, go forth with this knowledge, and perhaps you'll find a little bit of Rome in the most unexpected places. Standing in a dusty courtyard, the sun barely creeping over the ancient Roman skyline. Welcome to your first day at the Ludus, the Gladiator school that's about to become your new home, whether you like it or not. This ain't some cushy academy with toga-clad professors. Nope, it's more like the boot camp from hell, minus the motivational speeches, and with a lot more sharp objects. Now, before you get any ideas about being the next Russell Crowe, let's clear the air. Those epic tales of gladiators as noble warriors fighting for glory, they're about as accurate as a toga on a modern catwalk. Sure, gladiators were revered, but they were also commodities. Walking, talking, sword-swinging investments. The Roman ludus was less about personal honor and more about economic savvy. Think of it as a sort of ancient sports franchise. If you owned a gladiator school, you were looking to turn a profit, and these sweaty, muscle-bound recruits were your ticket to the big leagues. Enrollment fees for this brutal privilege ranged from 2,000 to 6,000 sesterces. For perspective, that's about the cost of a really decent horse or like half a lavish Roman dinner party. And trust me, the Romans knew how to party. But why were these institutions such a big deal in the first place? Well, like every blockbuster in history, it boils down to the crowd. Romans were entertainment junkies, and gladiatorial games were the ultimate spectacle. It was the Super Bowl, the World Cup, and the latest viral video all rolled into one. Except, instead of touchdowns or goals, you had bladed weapons and lots of sand. As you stand there, taking in the not-so-glamorous sights and sounds of the ludus, let's dispel another myth, the idea that every gladiator was a slave or a criminal. Sure, plenty were, but there were also volunteers, often desperate for glory, freedom, or just a shot at a better life. Some of these folks had real hopes pinned on this grim career change. Others were just trying to avoid a worse fate, like working in the mines or facing the executioner's blade. Now, you might ask yourself, who in their right mind would volunteer for this? Well, remember, ancient Rome wasn't exactly teeming with career counselors. If you were down on your luck, facing debt, or just had a penchant for danger, signing up for gladiator school might seem like a reasonable choice. Plus, there was the allure of fame. Successful gladiators could become the ancient equivalent of rock stars, complete with fan clubs, and if you survived long enough, a potentially hefty retirement fund. The economic gears behind the ludus were as intricate as the Roman aqueducts. Training a gladiator was an investment. You couldn't just toss a sword at someone and hope they didn't lop off their own foot. It took time, discipline, and a whole lot of sweat to turn raw recruits into crowd-pleasing combatants. And the folks running these schools knew it. They hired the best trainers, often former gladiators themselves, who knew every trick in the bloody book. So, as you get ready to start your day in the ludus, remember that each grueling drill and every barked order are part of a well-oiled machine designed to make money and keep the masses entertained. You're not just a warrior in training, you're a cog in the grand spectacle of Roman life. And while the romanticized legends of gladiator glory might tempt you, don't forget the hard truth. This was a world where life and death were just another day at the arena. As the dust settles in the courtyard and the morning sun starts to bake everything in sight, you quickly learn this isn't just about wielding a weapon with flair. It's about surviving Rome's ultimate reality show. The first lesson in gladiator school. The Lannister is your new best friend and worst nightmare rolled into one. Meet the Lannister, the master of ceremonies in this gritty spectacle. Forget any notion of a kindly mentor guiding you with wise words and gentle nudges. The Lannister is more like a shrewd CEO of a startup, except the product is you and the market is a bloodthirsty Roman audience. His job is to transform raw recruits into lethal performers, and he runs the place with the kind of efficiency that would make a modern corporate exec green with envy. His methods are less about building muscle and more about crafting a winning strategy. Training starts with the basics, and by basics, I mean grueling routines that would make a boot camp drill sergeant weep. Picture this. Hours of drilling with weighted wooden swords that are as fun to wield as a lead balloon. Why would you ask? Simple economics, my friend. It's cheaper to replace a splintered stick than patch up a hacked-off arm. Plus, there's nothing like the weight of a heavy wooden sword to build muscle and endurance. The Lannister knows that a well-trained gladiator is an investment that pays dividends in the arena. But don't let the wooden swords fool you into thinking this is a kiddie playground. The Lannisters' training methods are a high-stakes game of chess, each move designed to prepare you for the deadly dance of the amphitheater. The training regimen includes everything from wrestling and boxing to learning the art of dodging and deflecting blows, because let's face it, a dead gladiator doesn't generate any revenue. And here's the kicker. While you're sweating it out, you're also being sized up for your big debut. Just like casting directors today, the Lannister examines your every move, looking for that spark of talent that might make you the next big star of the arena. Maybe you've got the agility of a murmillo or the brute strength of a secutor. Whatever your type, rest assured, the Lannister has a role for you. It's like ancient Rome's version of America's Got Talent, but with a lot more grit and a much sharper judging panel. As you might guess, training isn't just about surviving the next match. It's about putting on a show. The Romans didn't come to the Colosseum to watch clumsy sword fights. They wanted drama, flair, and the kind of suspense that keeps you on the edge of your stone seat. Your job is to deliver that spectacle, to make the audience gasp and cheer. Think of it as a twisted mix of theater and combat sports, where the stakes are life and death. And let's talk about the diet, because what's a training montage without a nutrition plan? Gladiators were fed a diet rich in barley and beans, earning them the unflattering nickname Horderii, or barley men. Forget the paleo diet. This was all about carbs, carbs, and more carbs. A thick layer of fat was considered an asset for a gladiator. It protected vital organs and made them look more imposing. So, while you might not be winning any bodybuilding contests, you could certainly take a punch. But beyond the muscle and meal plans, there was the ever-present hierarchy within the ludus. Veteran gladiators, those who'd survived the pits and lived to tell the tale, often took on the role of assistant trainers. These were the grizzled veterans who'd seen it all and had the scars to prove it. Their wisdom was invaluable, but their patience was often as thin as a toga. They taught you the tricks of the trade, passing down survival tactics like precious heirlooms. And let's not kid ourselves. This was as much about showbiz as it was about survival. The Lannister was a businessman, after all, with a keen eye on the bottom line. He knew that a gladiator who could put on a good show was worth his weight in sesterces. The crowds didn't just want to see blood. They wanted style, panache, and maybe even a little drama. The Lannisters' job was to coach that out of you, turning raw recruits into seasoned performers who could woo the crowd as easily as they could wield a sword. In the end, the training was about more than just fighting. It was about creating legends. The Romans loved their heroes, and a gladiator who could rise above the blood and sand to become a crowd favorite was a valuable asset. But don't forget, every legend came with a price. For every victor crowned with laurels, there were countless others who fell in the arena, never to be remembered. So you see, the Lannisters' methods were more than just a series of grueling workouts. They were a finely tuned machine designed to churn out the next great star of the Roman Empire. In the grand theater of the arena, you weren't just a player. You were a product, a carefully crafted blend of skill and showmanship. The Lannister knew it, the crowd knew it, and soon enough you would too. As the midday sun beats down, let's take a moment to consider what fuels these would-be warriors. Spoiler alert, it's not the protein-packed diet you'd expect from a bunch of muscle-bound fighting machines. No, the gladiatorial menu reads more like a peasant's pantry than a bodybuilder's meal plan. Instead of steaks and eggs, you're looking at servings of barley and beans, enough to make even the most ardent carb-loader blush. Welcome to the world of the Horderii, or barley men, a nickname as catchy as a pop song, and just as telling of its era. Now, before you turn your nose up at this ancient diet, let's unpack the logic behind it. You see, the life of a gladiator wasn't about sculpting a chiseled physique worthy of a modern fitness magazine cover. It was about survival, endurance, and most importantly, economic efficiency. Those parts of barley and beans were the ancient equivalent of a high-carb energy bar, designed to keep gladiators going through endless drills and brutal matches. In a world where every cestus counted, a plant-based diet was a cost-effective way to fuel the Empire's most thrilling performers. Let's break down the numbers. Feeding an entire ludus was a significant investment, but it was one the Lannister couldn't skimp on. Gladiators consumed roughly 500 to 4,000 calories a day, about as much as a modern Olympic athlete. And while it might sound like a lot, consider the energy burned through hours of intense training and the occasional life-or-death combat. This was no casual weekend warrior scenario. It was survival of the fittest, quite literally. And speaking of survival, let's address the elephant, or should I say, the lack of elephant, in the room, meat. Contrary to the beefy myths, gladiators didn't feast on endless platters of meat. Sure, a little meat might make its way into the diet occasionally, but it was the exception, not the rule. The reality was that meat was expensive, and keeping costs down was key. The Empire's bean counters, pun fully intended, were more interested in longevity and stamina than bulging biceps. So why barley and beans? Besides being cheap and filling, these staples were rich in carbohydrates and provided a steady, slow-burning energy source. They helped build a layer of fat, which, believe it or not, was a strategic advantage. That extra padding acted like a squishy suit of armor, blunting the blows and protecting vital organs. Think of it as an ancient take on the modern sumo wrestler's build, more about mass and protection than aesthetics. From an economic standpoint, feeding a group of gladiators was a balancing act. On one hand, you needed to keep them healthy and ready to fight. On the other, you couldn't blow the budget on gourmet meals. The Lannister needed to keep his eye on the bottom line while ensuring his fighters were in peak condition. This meant keeping them well-fed but not indulged, strong but not sluggish. Now, if you're thinking that this diet was as bland as Roman numerals, you'd be right. But taste wasn't the priority. The genius lay in the simplicity and efficiency of it all. A bowl of barley porridge, a typical gladiator meal, could be whipped up quickly and in bulk, minimizing time spent away from training. Plus, it was easy on the purse strings, allowing the Lannister to allocate funds elsewhere, like weapons or bribes, to ensure favorable matchups in the arena. Because let's be honest, even in ancient Rome, a little schmoozing could go a long way. This diet also played into the broader social and political context of the time. The spectacle of the games was as much about politics as it was about entertainment. Keeping gladiators fed and ready ensured the games went on without a hitch, which in turn kept the masses entertained and the political elite in power. The games were a tool for social control, a way to keep the populace distracted while the upper echelons pulled the strings. And the gladiators, well fed on their barley and beans, were the star performers in this grand circus. So, while the reality of the gladiator diet might shatter some romanticized visions of meat-scarfing warriors, it reveals a deeper truth about the ancient world. Practicality often trumped passion. The Romans were nothing if not pragmatic, and their approach to feeding gladiators was no exception. It was an exercise in efficiency, a testament to the empire's ability to turn even the most brutal of spectacles into a finely tuned machine. In dissecting the diet of these ancient combatants, we peel back yet another layer of the gladiatorial myth. Behind the grit and glamour lies a story of strategy and survival, a world where every grain of barley and bean was part of a larger plan. The Lannister, ever the savvy entrepreneur, understood that his fighters were more than just muscle. They were investments, assets to be nurtured and maintained. As you imagine the midday pause in the dusty courtyard, with bowls of barley porridge lined up for the taking, consider the brilliance of it all. Here, amid the grit and grime, lies a story of ancient innovation, a testament to the Romans' ability to blend spectacle with shrewd calculation. In the end, the legend of the barley men is more than just a tale of diet. It's a reflection of an empire that understood the power of endurance over aesthetics, of strategy over brute strength. And as the sun continues its relentless march across the sky, the training resumes, fueled by the simple yet profound power of barley and beans. And just like that, the midday lull fades, replaced by the clamor of wooden swords and the shouts of trainers echoing through the air. It's time for the afternoon sparring sessions, where the real work begins and the line between training and entertainment blurs irreversibly. If you thought the morning drills were intense, welcome to the gladiator equivalent of a high-stakes dress rehearsal. Here, it's not just about surviving, it's about selling the fight, crafting a performance that will later captivate thousands in the amphitheater. Now, let's talk about these sparring sessions. Forget any notion of playful practice rounds. These bouts are brutal, designed to push gladiators to their psychological and physical limits. Picture a mix of martial arts training, live-action role-play, and a touch of theater, all rolled into one sweaty, adrenaline-fueled package. The Lannister and his trainers watch closely, not just for skill, but for charisma, because a gladiator who can engage the crowd is worth his weight in sesterces. And speaking of sesterces, let's dive into the economic powerhouse behind this spectacle. The more popular a gladiator, the better the odds at the ancient equivalent of a betting shop. Yes, sports betting isn't just a modern vice. Romans were all about the gamble, placing bets on their favorite fighters, as if they were backing the latest chariot racing team or horse. The outcome of these sparring sessions could shift public opinion faster than a chariot's wheels could spin, turning an unknown into a household name overnight. But what really sets these sessions apart is the psychological warfare at play. Trainers employ mind games worthy of a modern sports psychologist. The aim, to build mental resilience. The arena is a pressure cooker, and only those with nerves of steel survive. Psychological tactics range from subtle to severe: isolation, taunts, and the ever-looming threat of punishment if performance falters. It's about toughening up the mind as much as the body, building a gladiator who can handle the roar of the crowd and the fear of imminent death. Let's not kid ourselves. The Lannister isn't running a charity. Each sparring session is a calculated investment, an opportunity to assess each gladiator's market value. A promising recruit could be a ticket to financial windfall, a lackluster one, a loss. The stakes are high, and the Lannister knows that every swing of the sword could mean the difference between riches and ruin. And while the arena's dirt floor might seem miles away, its influence is omnipresent. These sessions are about more than just technique. They're about instilling a sense of theater. A successful gladiator must master the art of the dramatic fall, the perfectly timed blow, the taunting of opponents, all elements crucial for winning over the audience. The Romans didn't just want blood. They craved drama, suspense, and a good narrative arc. The economic implications spiral beyond the ludus walls. Cities would invest in these games, reaping the benefits of increased trade and tourism. The games were a social event, a place to be seen and heard, much like the red carpet events of today. Gladiators, in a sense, were the celebrities of their time, albeit with significantly shorter lifespans. Their victories and losses were dinner-table talk across the empire, their lives dissected for public consumption. All this investment meant that a gladiator's life was a carefully managed affair. The Lannister, part coach, part businessman, part agent, had to keep his fighters in peak condition, mentally and physically. This meant ensuring they were as much performers as they were fighters. After all, a touch of theatrical flair could secure a gladiator's place in the public's heart, and the Lannister's ledger. In this harsh world, the balance of power was delicate. A well-timed victory could elevate a gladiator to hero status, while a defeat could spell financial disaster for the Lannister. But even in defeat, a gladiator's life could be spared if he had won the audience's favor, an ancient thumbs up, if you will. Talk about pressure. Not only were you fighting for your life, but also for your brand. As the afternoon shadows stretch across the courtyard, the sparring continues, each clash of wooden swords a reminder of the stakes. It's a brutal ballet, where every move is a step towards survival or oblivion. But amid the chaos, there's a strange beauty to it all, a testament to humanity's endless fascination with storytelling, risk, and the spectacle of combat. So, as the dust settles and the sun dips lower, remember this. The sparring sessions are more than just preparation for the arena. They are a microcosm of Roman society itself, a blend of sport, spectacle, and shrewd economics. In the end, it's not just about who can fight well. It's about who can captivate, who can endure, and who can turn their name into legend. And in that dusty courtyard, these would-be warriors are learning that lesson, one swing at a time. As the training day draws to a close, the shadows lengthen, and the dust begins to settle. You can almost hear the echoes of future cheers and jeers that will fill the Colosseum. In this fleeting quiet, it's time to ponder the fate that awaits these gladiators once they step into the arena. Spoiler alert, it's not all glory and freedom. First, let's tackle the popular myth of the freeing of gladiators. Picture a victorious warrior being showered with rose petals, given a hearty slap on the back, and a pat on the head by some benevolent emperor who's just itching to hand over a wooden sword, a symbol of freedom. This Hollywood ending, while appealing, is about as common as finding a vegan recipe in an ancient Roman cookbook. Sure, some gladiators did earn their freedom, signified by that coveted rudies, but it was as rare as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Most were stuck in their deadly loop, fighting until they were too injured, too old, or too dead to continue. Consider the numbers. Out of the thousands of gladiators who fought, only a small fraction ever tasted true freedom, and even those lucky few didn't always find a life of leisure. Freed gladiators, called liberi, often remained tied to their former Lannister, working as trainers or assistants, forever bound to the world of blood and sand. Kind of like being promoted from intern to assistant manager, but never actually leaving the company. Now, why would anyone volunteer for this grim gig, you ask? Well, it's all about the allure of fame and fortune. Successful gladiators could become the ancient equivalent of reality TV stars, with devoted fan bases and even endorsements. Yes, that's right, product endorsements. Think of a gladiator promoting the latest Roman sandal or luxury toga. But like any celebrity life, the spotlight was often fleeting, and only a few managed to translate arena fame into lasting fortune. And let's not forget the societal backdrop against which this all played out. Gladiatorial games were more than just entertainment. They were a tool of political power. The games were a means for emperors and politicians to win favor with the masses, a distraction from the empire's other, less glamorous problems like invasions, plagues, or, heaven forbid, tax hikes. The games were the ultimate smokescreen, a grand spectacle to keep the public's gaze fixed firmly on the arena rather than the Senate. From a cultural standpoint, the games reflected deep societal tensions and values. They were a microcosm of Roman life, a place where class distinctions blurred, if only momentarily. In the arena, a gladiator's social status was determined by skill and bravery, not birthright. This was a world where a slave could become a star, albeit briefly, and where the line between hero and villain depended on which way the crowd's thumb turned. But don't let this momentary social fluidity fool you into thinking Rome was egalitarian. The very existence of the games underscored the harsh realities of Roman society, a rigid class system, an economy built on slave labor, and an insatiable appetite for violence as entertainment. Gladiators were the sacrificial pawns in this societal chess game, their lives a currency to placate the masses and distract them from real-world woes. The political significance of gladiators is etched in the stone of history. Emperors like Julius Caesar and Augustus used the games to solidify their power, offering free spectacles to gain public favor and secure their rule. The games were a barometer of political stability. When the state was strong, the games were grand and frequent. When it faltered, they became sparse and subdued. As we wrap up this day-in-the-life journey, let's reflect on the legacy of these ancient warriors. The allure of the gladiator, half hero, half victim, still captivates us today. They were the ultimate underdogs, battling against the odds in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Their lives were a testament to human resilience and the timeless quest for glory, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. In the end, the story of the gladiators is not just one of blood and sand, but of humanity itself, our fascination with spectacle, our longing for heroes, and our struggle to find meaning in the chaos. As you drift off with new knowledge tucked under your pillow, remember this: the legacy of the gladiators lives on, not just in the ruins of the Colosseum, but in the echoes of history that remind us of the enduring power of courage and the eternal dance between myth and reality. Beneath the grey skies of industrial Belfast, the RMS Titanic was more than just a ship. It was an embodiment of early 20th century ambition wrapped in steel and dreams. This wasn't just any boat. It was the crown jewel of the White Star Line, designed to be the largest and most luxurious ocean liner ever to grace the waves. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We all know how this story ends, but the real intrigue lies in how it all began. A tale of manpower, money, and more than a dash of arrogance. Now, if you were a shipbuilder in the late 1800 and early 1900, the name on everyone's lips was Harland and Wolff. These guys were the shipyard behemoths responsible for turning nautical dreams into reality. When J. Bruce Ismay, the big cheese at White Star Line, decided he wanted a new series of ships to outclass the competition, he turned to Harland and Wolff. Their mission: build a fleet that combined luxury with speed. Not too hard, right? Enter the Olympic-class liners, Olympic, Britannic, and our soon-to-be infamous Titanic. Construction on the Titanic began in 1909 with a price tag of $7.5 million. Now, if you're thinking, that sounds like a bargain, hold your horses. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking over $200 million today. And for what? A floating palace with enough opulence to make a Russian Tsar blush. Titanic wasn't just a vessel. She was a statement. Her builders aimed to set a new standard in sea travel, making sure that everyone from coal-shoveling stokers to top-hatted first-class passengers knew they were part of something grand. But what about this unsinkable business? Marketing at its finest. A shipyard manager reportedly boasted that not even God himself could sink this ship. Talk about tempting fate. The Titanic's construction featured watertight compartments, a new safety innovation that promised to keep her afloat even if the hull was breached. And yet, here we are, more than a century later, shaking our heads at the hubris of it all. Spoiler alert. It turns out it's not a great idea to assume divine intervention in your engineering specs. Let's meet the key players. First up, Jay, Bruce Ismay, the man with the plan, or Titanic-sized ego, depending on who you ask. He wanted to crush his rivals at Cunard Line, whose liners Lusitania and Mauretania were setting speed records across the Atlantic. Ismay's focus was luxury over velocity, a strategy that would come back to haunt him. Then there's Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer. He was the real brains behind the beauty, a meticulous engineer who tried to ensure every detail was perfect. Ironically, Andrews would later be one of the Titanic's unsung heroes, doing everything he could to save lives as the ship went down. And let's not forget Captain Edward Smith, the silver-haired veteran with an impeccable record. This was supposed to be his retirement cruise, a serene sail into the sunset after years of service. Instead, he got a one-way ticket to infamy. Poor Smith was saddled with the impossible task of navigating a vessel that was as much about making headlines as it was about sailing smoothly. He was the fall guy before anyone knew there was a fall to be had. Now, you might ask, why did the Titanic become such a symbol of human hubris? Well, let's break it down. At the time, the world was on the cusp of modernity, teetering between the old ways and a new, industrialized future. The Titanic was a microcosm of this transition, a massive, floating testament to human ingenuity and its limits. It was packed with the creme de la creme of society, all convinced they'd arrived at the pinnacle of human achievement. And yet, the iceberg lurking in the North Atlantic was a cold reminder that nature doesn't care about your social status or engineering marvels. The Titanic was more than just a ship. She was a cultural event. People were obsessed with her, from the gilt-edged elite sipping champagne in first class to the hopeful immigrants packed into steerage, dreaming of new lives in America. The ship's sheer scale and opulence made it a floating city with its own social order, a perfect stage for the drama to come. And isn't that the allure? The Titanic's story isn't just about a ship hitting an iceberg. It's about the collision of human aspirations and reality. So, as Titanic sat in Belfast, being fitted with all the trimmings of modern luxury, the world waited with bated breath. The ship was marketed as the epitome of safety and style, a vessel so grand it practically dared the universe to take it down. And therein lies the rub. All that ambition, all that technology, couldn't change the fact that nature plays by its own rules. If only they'd put as much faith in lifeboats as they did in their own invincibility. As the final rivets were driven and the paint dried, Titanic was ready for her maiden voyage. In 1912, she was set to cross the Atlantic with a cargo of dreams, hubris, and a tragic destiny that would echo through the ages. The Titanic wasn't just a ship. It was a lesson in humility, wrapped in a very expensive package. And like any good story, it's not just about how it ended, but how it all began, with men and money dreaming of the impossible. And so, with the last touches complete, the Titanic was ready to embark on her maiden voyage, a floating symbol of human ambition, hubris, and as fate would have it, downfall. On April 10, 1912, the ship left Southampton, England, with a fanfare befitting a royal procession. But this wasn't just any royal affair. It was a veritable who's who of Edwardian society rubbing elbows with hopeful emigrants dreaming of the American dream. Let's talk about the people on board. 224 souls, to be exact. One might say the Titanic was like a social experiment afloat, a microcosm of early 20th century society divided by class, aspiration, and destiny. At the top of this oceanic food chain were the first-class passengers, the millionaires and moguls who turned the Titanic into their personal playground. We're talking about people like John Jacob, the store Roman IV, the real estate tycoon who was worth about $87 million back then, roughly $2, $3 billion today. He was traveling with his young, pregnant wife, Madeline, but let's sidestep the juicy details of their May-December romance for now. First class was also home to Isidore Straus, co-owner of Macy's department store, and his wife Ida, who famously refused a lifeboat seat to stay with her husband. Romance isn't dead, folks, but apparently it can drown. Then there was Benjamin Guggenheim, the mining magnate who reportedly donned his best evening wear as the ship went down, quipping he'd go down like a gentleman. Talk about going down with style. But the Titanic wasn't just a luxury liner for the well-heeled. She also carried the dreams of 709 third-class passengers, the steerage folks who represented over 30 nationalities. Many were immigrants seeking a new life in America, clutching their dreams as tightly as their meager belongings. Steerage was a world away from the marbled halls of first class, but it was still a step up from the conditions they'd left behind. Tickets cost about $20, or around $550 today, a small price for the promise of opportunity. Now, let's not ignore the middle class stuck in second class. 285 passengers who were neither here nor there, living in the liminal space between aspiration and reality. These were teachers, clerks and clergy, the respectable folks who could afford a bit of comfort without the ostentation. They paid around $60 for their ticket, which would set you back nearly $1, $700 today. Not quite chump change, but a worthwhile investment for a taste of the high seas. As the Titanic steamed across the Atlantic, she was a floating palace of indulgence. First-class passengers dined in style, feasting on 13-course meals that would leave a Michelin-starred chef reeling. We're talking oysters, filet mignon, and Waldorf pudding washed down with the finest wines. Meanwhile, the third-class menu was a bit more utilitarian, featuring hearty staples like boiled potatoes and gruel. Yum! But let's not get bogged down in the culinary delights. The Titanic was more than just a place to fill your belly. She was a marvel of modern engineering and luxury. Her amenities were the stuff of legend: opulent staircases, Turkish baths, a swimming pool, and even a squash court. She was essentially a floating city, complete with its own newspaper, the Atlantic Daily Bulletin, which kept passengers informed and entertained with daily updates. As the Titanic plowed through the icy waters, Captain Edward Smith was at the helm, a seasoned sailor on his final voyage before retirement. The ship was his swan song, but instead of a graceful exit, he found himself at the center of a maritime melodrama. The North Atlantic was notorious for its icebergs, and April was prime iceberg season, a fact not lost on Smith or his crew. In the days leading up to the fateful collision, the Titanic received at least 6 iceberg warnings, but hindsight is 20/20, and nobody seemed overly concerned at the time. Why slow down when you can glide through the Atlantic, full steam ahead, in a ship believed to be unsinkable? Captain Smith, perhaps feeling the pressure to make a splash on his final run, decided to maintain Titanic's speed at a brisk 22 knots. The logic: a faster crossing would generate more buzz and cement the ship's reputation as a marvel of modern engineering. But here's the kicker: speeding through iceberg-infested waters is a bit like playing dodgeball with nature, and nature always wins. The wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were busy sending out passenger messages to shore, and iceberg warnings were often shuffled to the bottom of the pile. It's a classic case of priorities gone awry, with tragic implications. As the Titanic sailed into the night of April 14, the weather was unusually calm. The sea was as flat as a pancake, making it harder to spot icebergs. The lookout crew perched high in the crow's nest, but without binoculars due to a mix-up back in Southampton. Imagine being asked to find Waldo in a blizzard, except Waldo is an iceberg, and you're on a collision course at over 20 miles per hour. And so, the scene was set. The Titanic, a symbol of human achievement, was barreling through the darkness, unaware of the icy specter lurking ahead. It's a tale as old as time, man's ambition versus nature's indifference. As the ship pushed forward, those on board remained blissfully unaware of the drama that would soon unfold. In the ballroom, the orchestra played on, and passengers danced beneath crystal chandeliers. In the smoking room, gentlemen puffed cigars, wagering on the ship's arrival time in New York. Down in steerage, families huddled together, dreaming of what lay ahead. It's a snapshot of life on the Titanic, a moment frozen in time, just before the world changed forever. This isn't just a story about a ship hitting an iceberg. It's about the collision of dreams and reality. It's about the arrogance of believing that we can conquer nature with our machines and our money. But as history would soon reveal, the Titanic was not unsinkable, and her story was far from over. The stage was set for one of the most infamous maritime disasters in history, a tragedy that would echo through the ages and serve as a grim reminder of human hubris. Stay tuned, because the night is young, and the iceberg awaits its cue. And so, Under a starry sky over the North Atlantic, the Titanic's date with destiny approached with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. At precisely 11:40 p.m., the iceberg was spotted by lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, perched in their crow's nest with nothing but the cold wind and their wits. Fleet rang the warning bell 3 times and phoned the bridge, uttering the chilling words, "Iceberg right ahead." The Titanic was racing through the darkness at roughly 22 knots, a speed that would make any sensible captain question his life choices. First Officer William Murdoch, the man in charge at the time, ordered the ship to be steered hard a-starboard and the engines reversed. Unfortunately, the Titanic was about as nimble as an oceanic elephant. The ship's immense size and speed meant it was more likely to pirouette than pivot, and within a mere 37 seconds of spotting the iceberg, the Unsinkable ship met its match. The iceberg scraped along the starboard side, popping rivets and opening the hull to the sea like a giant can opener. The damage was done, and it was catastrophic. Now, here's where things get interesting. The iceberg didn't just puncture the hull. It sliced open 5 of the ship's 16 supposedly watertight compartments. Titanic was designed to stay afloat with up to 4 flooded compartments, but 5. That was a game changer. Thomas Andrews, our meticulous designer, was one of the first to grasp the gravity of the situation. He calculated that the Titanic had about 2 hours before she would be swallowed by the icy depths. This wasn't a drill. It was a maritime apocalypse. As the icy water gushed in, the ship's fate was sealed, and chaos began its slow, inevitable creep across the decks. Captain Edward Smith, faced with the unimaginable, ordered the lifeboats to be readied. But here's the kicker. There were only enough lifeboats for about half of the 224 souls on board. Why? Because back in 1912, lifeboat capacity was determined by the ship's tonnage, not its passenger count. Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, enough for approximately 178 people. Oops, someone forgot to carry the first-class passengers, with their elegant gowns and tuxedos, were ushered politely toward the lifeboats, while third-class passengers found themselves in a labyrinthine struggle for survival. The social hierarchy that had defined life on board the Titanic was now a matter of life and death. Women and children were given priority, but that was easier said than done, especially when panic began to set in. Let's talk about some key players in this unfolding drama. Bruce Ismay, the man with the promotional plan, was ostensibly helping with the evacuation. However, he would later face intense scrutiny for surviving the disaster, accused of jumping ship while others perished. His reputation sank faster than the Titanic. Meanwhile, Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, was seen tirelessly assisting passengers, reportedly last seen in the first-class smoking room, staring at a painting as the water rose around him, a tragic image of a man confronting his creation's fatal flaw. Then there was the orchestra, led by Wallace Hartley, who famously played on as the ship descended into chaos. Their music, a haunting melody that would become iconic, was an attempt to maintain calm amid the madness. It said they ended with "Nearer, my God, to thee," although accounts vary. Either way, their courage gave a touch of gallant dignity to an otherwise grim scene. As lifeboats began to lower, the class divide was starkly evident. First-class passengers were given access to the boats with relative ease, while third-class passengers, many of whom spoke little English, faced locked gates and confusion. It wasn't just a question of access, but of understanding. The third-class passengers were often left in the dark, literally and figuratively, about what was happening. The first lifeboat to leave, No. 7, held just 28 people, despite a capacity of 65. The crew, unsure and untrained, hesitated to fully load the boats, fearing they might buckle under the weight. As the minutes ticked by, passengers began to realize the gravity of the situation. Lifeboats were launched half full, and panic intensified, while the ship's bow sank lower into the ocean. And yet, amid the chaos, there were moments of profound humanity. Isidore and Ida Strauss, the Macy's mogul, and his wife, refused to be separated. Ida reportedly told her husband, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." They both perished, a poignant testament to love in the face of death. As the ship's stern began to lift out of the water, the angle of Titanic's descent steepened, increasing the urgency. The wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, worked tirelessly to send distress signals, the now famous CQD and SAS. The latter was a relatively new call for help, and its use that night would forever cement it in maritime history. The Carpathia, a ship over 58 miles away, was the first to respond, steaming full speed towards Titanic. But it would take them over 4 hours to reach the site, far too late to prevent the unfolding tragedy. Meanwhile, another ship, the Californian, was a mere 10 miles away, but its wireless operator had gone to bed, missing Titanic's calls for help. The ship's captain, Stanley Lord, claimed not to have realized the scope of Titanic's distress, a decision that would haunt him and spark endless debate. The clock ticked past 2:00 a.m., and Titanic's fate was sealed. With the ship nearly vertical, the stern detached and settled back into the water before rising again. Those left on board faced a terrifying plunge into the freezing Atlantic. At 2:20 a.m., Titanic disappeared beneath the waves, leaving over 500 people to the mercy of the ocean. Survivors in lifeboats could hear the cries of those in the water, a haunting chorus that would haunt their memories forever. The sinking of the Titanic was not just a maritime disaster. It was a staggering indictment of human arrogance and systemic failure. The tragedy laid bare the folly of underestimating nature and the peril of social inequality. It prompted changes in maritime safety, including lifeboat requirements and the establishment of the International Ice Patrol to monitor icebergs. Yet, despite the lessons learned, the Titanic remains a symbol of hubris, a floating reminder that in the end, nature always has the final say. And so, the Titanic's story doesn't end with her sinking, but continues to ripple through history, an unsinkable narrative that refuses to stay submerged. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the aftermath, where stories of survival and loss intertwine, and the world grapples with the lessons of April 14, 1912. As the Titanic vanished beneath the icy waves, leaving behind a chilling silence, the real test of human endurance and folly was just beginning. Enter the RMS Carpathia, gallantly steaming toward the chaos, a mere speck on the ocean compared to the behemoth she'd been called to rescue. Captain Arthur Rostron, the man in charge, was like a caffeinated knight in shining armor, pushing his ship to its limits, navigating ice fields at a blistering 17 knots to reach the Titanic survivors. The Carpathia arrived around 4:00 a.m., roughly 2 hours after Titanic's final plunge, to find lifeboats barbing like grim flotsam on the frigid Atlantic. Imagine the scene. 705 shivering, shell-shocked survivors pulled from lifeboats, some still clutching their life vests as if they might spontaneously inflate a sense of security. The Carpathia's crew sprang into action, providing blankets, hot drinks, and whatever comfort they could muster. It was a small mercy amid a sea of despair. The survivors' tales began to weave the fabric of a narrative that would captivate the world, a tapestry of heroism, cowardice, and the stark reality of social stratification. Now, let's talk about the media frenzy that followed. In an era where the fastest news traveled at the speed of Morse code, the Titanic disaster was a journalistic goldmine. The press turned the sinking into a spectacle, with headlines screaming across the Atlantic faster than the Carpathia could sail. Titanic sunk, loss of over 500 lives, blared the New York Times, turning the disaster into a sensation that transcended the Atlantic. Reporters swarmed the docks when Carpathia finally reached New York on April 18, 1912, eager to scoop the stories fresh from the mouths of survivors. The media, ever the myth-makers, latched onto the unsinkable narrative like a bulldog on a bone. The term unsinkable had been tossed about in the pre-voyage hype, not by White Star Line directly, but by enthusiastic journalists and a public eager for spectacle. It was the perfect hook, a tragic irony too juicy to resist. The myth of Titanic's invincibility was born not just from the hubris of her creators, but from the romantic imagination of a world in love with progress, blind to its own limitations. As the Carpathia docked and the survivors disembarked, the world demanded explanations. Enter the inquiries, a double-barreled affair with investigations both in the United States and the United Kingdom. The American inquiry, spearheaded by Senator William Alden Smith, kicked off just a day after the Carpathia docked. Smith, a man with a penchant for grandstanding, grilled everyone from Captain Rostron to J. Bruce Ismay, trying to piece together not just the how, but the why of Titanic's tragic end. The British inquiry, led by Lord Mersey, followed in May, with a slightly more genteel approach but no less fervor. Both inquiries aim to sift through the wreckage of human error and systemic failures, though often they felt more like theatrical performances than genuine quests for truth. The hearings were a parade of testimonies, each more sensational than the last, revealing a web of misjudgments, ignored warnings, and class disparities that turned a tragedy into a scandal. Was Captain Smith to blame for ignoring iceberg warnings? Was Bruce Ismay a coward for stepping into a lifeboat? These inquiries wrestled with such questions, struggling to assign blame in a disaster shaped by a perfect storm of arrogance, technology, and nature. The hearings became a stage where the myth of the Titanic was both constructed and deconstructed, a public autopsy of human frailty. The findings, a damning indictment of the maritime status quo. The Titanic disaster laid bare the inadequacies of existing safety regulations, which, shockingly, still operated under the assumption that ships were unsinkable. Lifeboats for all. That was a revolutionary idea back then, believe it or not. The inquiries recommended sweeping changes, including lifeboat space for every soul aboard, regular lifeboat drills, and 24-hour radio watch. Simple measures that seem glaringly obvious now, but were as novel as sliced bread in 1912. These regulatory changes were enshrined in the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, in 1914, a testament to the notion that sometimes it takes a catastrophe to wake us up from our complacency. The Titanic's sinking was a catalyst, dragging maritime law kicking and screaming into the modern era, and finally acknowledging that no ship is truly unsinkable. Yet, despite the lessons learned, the Titanic's legend only grew. The ship became a symbol of the early 20th century's blind faith in technology, a cautionary tale of hubris writ large across the ocean. The romantic allure of the Titanic, her opulence, her tragic end, and the stories of those on board, cemented her place in history, a narrative as unsinkable as the ship was supposed to be. In the years following the disaster, Titanic's story was retold in books, films, and countless retellings, each adding layers to the mythos. The disaster became an allegory for the pitfalls of human ambition, a reminder that nature is indifferent to our grand designs. Yet, the allure of the Titanic endures, a testament to our fascination with tragedy, our love for stories where the stakes are as titanic as the ship itself. As we sail onward to explore the legacy of Titanic in Part 5, we'll delve into the lasting impact on culture and how the Titanic continues to haunt our imaginations. Stay tuned, because this tale has more depths to plumb and myths to debunk. The Titanic's legacy is far from finished, and her story remains a poignant reminder of the price we pay for our hubris and the fragility of human life against the vast, indifferent sea. So, where does the Titanic's tale leave us? Bobbing on the ocean of history like a lifeboat, adrift in the fog of myth and reality. Let's cut through the Hollywood haze and get down to brass tacks. When it comes to cultural impact, Titanic is the ship that launched 1,000 interpretations, books, documentaries, and yes, that cinematic colossus directed by James Cameron in 1997. But before we dive headfirst into the world of celluloid, let's tackle the real legacy of the Titanic. Spoiler alert, it's more than just Leonardo DiCaprio yelling, "I'm the king of the world." First, the hard facts. The Titanic's sinking was a watershed moment in maritime safety, a catastrophe so colossal it forced the world to rethink its approach to seafaring. The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, in 1914, was a direct result, mandating lifeboats for everyone and 24-hour radio watches. It was like the maritime equivalent of installing airbags in cars after realizing that, yes, accidents do happen. The Titanic's legacy in the realm of safety regulations is as unsinkable as the ship was supposed to be. But regulations are just the tip of the iceberg, pun fully intended, when it comes to Titanic's cultural footprint. The ship has become a symbol of early 20th century optimism and hubris, a floating metaphor for the era's blind faith in progress. The Titanic was a technological marvel, a steel behemoth boasting the latest in safety features and luxury. Yet, its tragic end serves as a cautionary tale. You can dress a ship in opulence and innovation, but it won't save you from the icy hand of fate. It's the classic story of human ambition running aground on the shoals of nature's indifference. Now, let's plunge into the murky depths of pop culture. James Cameron's Titanic isn't just a movie, it's a phenomenon. Released in 1997, it grossed over $2 billion worldwide, making it one of the highest-grossing films of all time. Cameron took the bones of the Titanic story and wrapped them in a love story more melodramatic than a soap opera marathon. Sure, it's easy to scoff at the corny dialogue and improbable scenarios, but Cameron's film did something remarkable. It reignited global fascination with Titanic, propelling the ship back into the limelight with all the subtlety of an iceberg strike. The film's legacy is twofold. On one hand, it romanticized the tragedy, turning the Titanic into a star-crossed lover's paradise, where the ship's very real victims become supporting players in Jack and Rose's epic drama. On the other hand, it sparked a renewed interest in the genuine stories of those aboard the Titanic, leading to more documentaries, exhibitions, and even underwater explorations. Yes, the film gave us Celine Dion's "My Heart Will Go On" as an earworm for the ages, but it also shone a spotlight on the ship's historical significance. Speaking of underwater explorations, let's talk about the actual wreck. Discovered in 1985 by oceanographer Robert Ballard, the Titanic's resting place is a chilling monument to human ambition and tragedy. Located about 370 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, the wreck lies at a depth of about 500 feet, a sunken testament to the perils of overconfidence. Ballard's discovery was a game-changer, revealing the Titanic's final resting place and sparking debates about the ethics of exploring and salvaging historical wrecks. Should the Titanic be left undisturbed as a maritime grave or explored as a source of historical and cultural insight? It's a debate as deep as the ocean itself. Modern technology has enabled new explorations of the wreck, with submersibles capturing haunting images of the ship's remains, from the grand staircase to the rusting hull. Each expedition offers a glimpse into the past, a tangible connection to a moment frozen in time. These voyages have also helped debunk myths, such as the idea that the Titanic went down in one piece. The reality is more fragmented, literally, with the ship split in two, a stark reminder of the power of nature over human constructs. So, what does the Titanic teach us about technology and optimism? It's a lesson in humility, a reminder that no matter how advanced our technology, we're still at the mercy of the natural world. The Titanic was a triumph of engineering, a floating city brimming with innovation and luxury. Yet, all it took was an iceberg to lay her low, a humbling reminder of the limits of human control. It's the same lesson we grapple with today, as we face challenges like climate change and technological ethics, constantly reminded that our inventions, no matter how grand, are not infallible. In the end, the Titanic's legacy is both a haunting reminder of human fallibility and a testament to our enduring fascination with tragedy. It's a story that resonates because it captures the essence of the human condition, our dreams, our hubris, our resilience in the face of disaster. The Titanic may have sunk over a century ago, but her story floats on, a narrative as unsinkable as the ship was billed to be. And there you have it, folks. The Titanic's tale is a rich tapestry of ambition, tragedy, and legacy, woven together by the threads of history and myth. The ship's story isn't just about a maritime disaster. It's about the collision of human dreams and reality, a cautionary tale that's as relevant today as it was in 1912. So next time you hear the haunting strains of "My Heart Will Go On," remember that the Titanic's legacy is more than just a Hollywood romance. It's a lesson in humility and the enduring power of history. High up in the Andes, somewhere around 13,000 feet, where the air is thin and folks today might consider it a prime spot for a hiking challenge, the Incas saw opportunity. Their empire, which at its peak in the early 16th century stretched over 500 miles from modern-day Ecuador to Chile, wasn't cobbled together by accident. No, the Incas were like the ultimate DIY enthusiasts, except their projects involved entire mountains. These folks were busy turning the inhospitable into the incredible, making farming on steep slopes look as easy as pie, albeit a pie that required a hefty dose of ingenuity and grit. Let's start with the arch-nemesis every Inca farmer faced: gravity and altitude. Unlike cozy farmlands in the valleys, the Andes threw down the gauntlet with sheer cliffs, unpredictable weather, and a thin atmosphere that made you feel like you were trying to breathe through a cocktail straw. But the Incas didn't see a mountain range. They saw endless potential. How do you plant corn on a vertical incline? Simple. You carve the mountain into steps. Not just any steps, mind you, but vast networks of agricultural terraces that rivaled even the most ambitious staircases in history. These terraces, called Andines, were engineering marvels that turned barren slopes into verdant fields. Picture thousands of them, cascading down the mountainside like a green waterfall. Each terrace had a purpose, from retaining soil and water to creating microclimates that allowed for a variety of crops. The Incas built them with a precision that would make even a Swiss watchmaker nod in approval. They employed retaining walls, some of which stand to this day, to prevent erosion and conserve water. And we're not talking about a couple of bricks stacked up. These walls were masterpieces of stone fitting, crafted without mortar, yet strong enough to withstand centuries. Now, if you're wondering why anyone would go to such lengths just to grow potatoes, let's talk about the stakes. The Inca Empire's backbone was its food supply, and these terraces were vital to feeding a population that might have hit the 12 million mark at its zenith. Plus, potatoes weren't the only item on the menu. The Incas cultivated over 70 different crops, including maize, quinoa, and various beans. These terraces allowed them to grow different plants at different altitudes, taking advantage of the unique conditions each level offered. It was like a vertical smorgasbord, a culinary skyscraper of sorts. But terraces alone weren't enough. Enter the aqueducts, the unsung heroes of the Incan agricultural revolution. Their water management system was a marvel of ancient plumbing. While today's cities struggle with potholes and plumbing leaks, the Incas were building aqueducts that snaked through the mountains, defying gravity and logic. These structures channeled water from glacial melts and mountain springs to the terraces below. And no, they didn't just eyeball the placement. They meticulously calculated the angles to ensure a steady flow without flooding. The Incas were nothing if not precise, proving once again that necessity is the mother of not just invention, but downright genius. The aqueducts were more than just practical. They were a testament to the Incas' understanding of their environment. They knew how to work with the land, rather than bend it to their will. And while they didn't have the luxury of modern technology, they did have a deep knowledge of the natural world, a knowledge passed down through generations that allowed them to thrive in what most would consider a no-man's land. Of course, there's a bit of romance in imagining these achievements as purely the work of a harmonious society living in tune with nature. But let's not ignore the less savory aspects of this narrative. The Incas' success was also built on the backs of a vast labor force, organized through a system called mira. Every able-bodied citizen was required to contribute labor to state projects, a sort of tax paid in sweat. While participation was technically a civic duty, it was also an obligation that left little room for dissent. The terraces and aqueducts were not just feats of architectural brilliance. They were products of a highly structured society that left little to chance. And while we're busy myth-busting, let's address the notion of the Inca Empire as a peaceful utopia. The Incas were as much about conquest as they were about construction. Their empire expanded through a mix of diplomacy and military might, absorbing various cultures and bringing them under the Inca umbrella. This empire was a patchwork of different peoples, each contributing to the agricultural kaleidoscope that the terraces supported. So, where does this leave us? The Incas were a society that thrived on innovation, blending communal effort with an impressive command of their environment. They took the Andes, a seemingly unyielding landscape, and transformed it into one of the world's greatest agricultural wonders. It was a process that involved not just brawn, but brains, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. While they may not have had the wheel, they more than made up for it with their knack for turning the impossible into the everyday. In the end, the Inca Empire wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in the most extraordinary way possible. And speaking of thriving, let's shift gears from the agricultural wonders to the architectural marvels that truly cemented the Inca legacy. Pun absolutely intended. Enter Machu Picchu and Cusco, the crown jewels of Incan architecture, where stone masonry reached its zenith. If these sites were Instagram accounts, they'd have followers in the millions, with hashtags like #StoneGoals and hash no mortar no problem. So, how did the Incas manage to build these awe-inspiring structures without the aid of modern technology? Or, mortar. First up, Machu Picchu, the iconic symbol of the Inca Empire. Nestled nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, this city wasn't just plopped on a mountain to make for good postcards. It was meticulously planned and executed with the kind of precision that makes the Great Pyramids look like a weekend DIY project. Completed in the mid-15th century, Machu Picchu is often credited to Pachacuti, the Inca ruler who had a knack for empire building and a flair for dramatic real estate. The site covers about 13 square kilometers and includes more than 150 buildings, terraces, temples, and plazas galore. It's like an architectural Swiss army knife, built for function and beauty. Now, the piece de resistance of Inca masonry, the no-mortar technique. Imagine playing a game of Tetris where losing was not an option. The Incas cut their stones so precisely that they fit together without a speck of mortar to hold them in place. These stones have withstood earthquakes, weather, and the ravages of time, all thanks to their ingenious design. The secret. The Incas employed a method known as ashlar masonry, where stones were shaped to fit perfectly against each other, creating a structure that was flexible enough to absorb the shocks of seismic activity. Forget about using a level or spirit measure. These folks had a knack for eyeballing it that would make any modern contractor weep with envy. But how did they achieve such precision? Some suggest that they used metal tools made of copper and bronze, while others believe they employed a combination of stone hammers and chisels. They would sand and polish the faces of stones until they fit like a dream. Yes, it sounds labor-intensive because it was. But when your empire depends on the durability of your construction, you don't cut corners. Literally. As for the myths surrounding these stone wonders, let's address the proverbial elephant, or rather alien, in the room. There are those who love to speculate that extraterrestrial beings lent a hand in the construction of Machu Picchu. After all, how could mere mortals achieve such perfection? Let's chalk that one up to the human tendency to romanticize the unknown. The truth is, the Incas were just that good. They had a deep understanding of their materials, and an even deeper understanding of the land they were working with. While the idea of alien architects is fun to entertain, it's a bit of a disservice to the ingenuity of human effort. Moving on to Cusco, the heart of the Inca Empire. Known as the navel of the world, Cusco was more than just the political and cultural capital. It was a testament to Inca engineering. The city's layout was designed in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal, with the Coricancha, or Temple of the Sun, at its heart. This wasn't just any temple. It was adorned with gold and served as the epicenter of Incan spirituality. Cusco was a city that wore its symbolism on its sleeve, with every building and street aligned to celestial bodies and Incan mythology. In Cusco, the stonework reached astounding levels of intricacy. The famous 12-angle stone in the Hatan Rumiak Street is a masterclass in masonry. Each angle fits so perfectly that you couldn't fit a needle between the stones. It's as though the Incas were showing off their skills, not just to their contemporaries, but to future generations. The city was built to last, and last it did, surviving Spanish conquest and natural calamities alike. Economically, the construction of these marvels was a massive undertaking. It required not just raw materials, but also a labor force that operated under the Mida system. Imagine being called upon to work on these monumental projects, contributing to something larger than oneself. It was both a privilege and an obligation, a testament to the communal spirit that drove the Inca machine. This wasn't just about building structures. It was about building an empire that could withstand the test of time. The political and social factors at play were equally significant. The Incas were experts in integrating conquered peoples into their empire, often using architecture as a means of asserting dominance and unity. By constructing grand structures, they showcased their power and the benefits of being part of the Inca world. It was a blend of coercion and cooperation, a strategy that allowed them to maintain control over a vast and diverse empire. So, while Machu Picchu and Cusco might inspire tales of mystical origins and lost civilizations, the reality is both more mundane and more impressive. These sites are the product of human determination, skill, and a bit of clever engineering. The Incas were masters of their environment, creating architectural wonders that continue to baffle and inspire. Their legacy is not just in the stones they laid, but in the stories they left behind, etched into the fabric of history. And as we dig deeper into these tales, it's clear that the truth, with all its grit and glory, is far more fascinating than any myth. And speaking of realities, let's dive into the nuts and bolts, or should I say stones and sweat, that held the Inca Empire together. Well, it's easy to get lost in the romantic notion of a unified society working in perfect harmony to create architectural wonders. The truth is a bit more gritty. The Inca Empire wasn't just built on grand visions. It was built on the backs of its people, through a labor system known as mida. This wasn't your modern-day volunteer gig or a weekend DIY project. No, mida was more like that obligatory group project in school where you did all the work, but everyone got the credit. Only in the Inca version, the stakes were a bit higher. Let's break it down. mida was a mandatory public service system that required every able-bodied citizen to contribute labor to state projects. Think of it as a tax, but one paid in sweat and toil. From building those awe-inspiring terraces to constructing roads that crisscrossed the empire like an ancient GPS, mida workers were the engine that powered the Inca machine. And no, they weren't exactly whistling while they worked. Participation was compulsory, and while it did foster a sense of civic duty, it also left little room for personal freedom. So, while we might picture happy laborers basking in the Andean sun, the reality was more complex, a balancing act between duty and drudgery. This brings us to the Empire's extensive road network, an achievement that would make even the most seasoned civil engineer tip their hard hat. Picture this, over 24,000 miles of road, winding through some of the most rugged terrain imaginable. These weren't just dirt paths. They were carefully constructed routes that connected the farthest reaches of the empire. The Incas didn't have the luxury of wheels or beasts of burden like horses, so these roads were built for foot traffic and pack llamas. Yes, llamas. Those fluffy, slightly judgmental creatures were the backbone of Inca logistics. Now, let's bust another myth. These roads weren't just about getting from point A to point B. They were strategic arteries of control, allowing the Incas to move troops, goods, and information with remarkable efficiency. The roads were so well constructed that some segments are still in use today. But don't be fooled by the image of a leisurely stroll through the Andes. These roads were not for the faint-hearted. They included steep inclines, suspension bridges, and steps that would give any modern stairmaster a run for its money. Economically, the road system was a game-changer. It facilitated trade and communication, integrating the diverse regions of the empire into a cohesive whole. This was no small feat, considering the empire's sprawling size and the varied cultures it encompassed. The roads were the empire's circulatory system, vital for maintaining the flow of resources and ideas. But here's the kicker. All this construction was fueled by mida labor. So while the roads symbolize unity and progress, they also highlight the underlying social structure that made it all possible. In terms of social and political structures, the Inca Empire was a masterclass in top-down management. At the helm was the Sapa Inca, the emperor, considered a living god with a direct line to the divine. This wasn't just a ceremonial title. It was a position of immense power, both politically and spiritually. The Sapa Inca held the empire's reins, orchestrating the grand symphony of labor, resources, and military might. Below him, a hierarchy of nobles and administrators kept the machine running smoothly, ensuring that every piece of the puzzle fit perfectly into place. The political landscape was as much about integration as it was about control. The Incas were adept at incorporating conquered peoples into their empire, often allowing them to retain their local customs and leaders, provided they pledged loyalty to the Inca state. It was a mix of carrot and stick, a strategy that balanced coercion with cooperation. By promoting a sense of shared identity, the Incas were able to maintain a vast and diverse empire without constant conflict. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was still an empire built on conquest, and the roads served as much for military expeditions as they did for trade. So, were the Incas the original work hard, play hard society? Well, they certainly had the work hard part down to an art. But the notion of happy laborers frolicking down the roads after a long day of empire building is more fiction than fact. Life in the Inca Empire was a complex tapestry of duty, devotion, and survival, painted with broad strokes of ambition and ingenuity. The roads, the middle system, and the political structures were all threads in this tapestry, each contributing to the empire's enduring legacy. As we continue our journey through the annals of Inca history, it's clear that the truth, with all its complexities and contradictions, is far more compelling than any myth. The Incas were a society that thrived on innovation and adaptation, turning challenges into opportunities and leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire awe. And while they may not have had the luxury of a modern happy hour, they certainly knew how to build an empire that stood the test of time. As we venture further into this story, there's still much to uncover about the people behind these monumental achievements and the world they crafted with such precision and purpose. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Incas is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more revelations about this remarkable civilization. And so, as we delve deeper into the multifaceted marvel that was the Inca Empire, it's high time we talked about the economic prowess that funded their architectural escapades and kept the whole mountain-sized machine churning. Because let's face it, building an empire doesn't come cheap, and we're not just talking about the cost of chiseling stones or feeding a llama army. No, we're diving into the nitty-gritty of the Incan economy, where the stakes were as high as the Andes themselves. Welcome to an empire where money didn't clink or jingle, because, believe it or not, the Incas didn't have a currency. That's right, folks. No coins, no bills, no awkward bartering with seashells. The Inca economy was a well-oiled machine driven by the principles of reciprocity and redistribution, more communal potluck than capitalist buffet. At its core was a system that ensured resources flowed from the hands of producers to the grand projects that defined the empire. It was like a giant, interconnected web of IOUs, except instead of "I'll mow your lawn," it was, "I'll help you build a wall that can withstand an earthquake." Now, you might be thinking, how on earth did they keep track of all this? Enter the quipu, a series of knotted strings that were the Inca version of the cloud, only without the need for Wi-Fi or a password reset. These seemingly simple chords were an accountant's dream, capable of recording everything from census data to crop yields. Imagine balancing a national budget with what looks like a colorful macrame project. Each knot, each string, each color carried specific information, making the quipu an essential tool for administrators who had to manage resources across an empire that spanned around 770,000 square miles. The quipu was more than just an ancient Excel sheet. It was a testament to the Incas' ingenuity in data management. While modern accountants might break into a cold sweat at the thought of doing without their trusty spreadsheets, Incan record keepers handled their duties with strings and knots, proving that necessity truly is the mother of invention, or at least the mother of creative bookkeeping. And just like today, the accuracy of these records was critical. A misplaced knot could mean the difference between a well-fed community and a village that had to make do with quinoa leftovers. Speaking of feeding the empire, let's talk about the agricultural bounty that kept the Inca economy humming along. Remember those terraces we were raving about earlier? Well, they weren't just pretty landscapes. They were economic lifelines. With over 70 different crops under cultivation, the Incas had a diverse agricultural portfolio that would make any farmer's market green with envy. From maize to potatoes to the all-important coca leaves, each crop played a role in sustaining the empire's burgeoning population. And to keep the wheels of trade turning, these commodities were transported along the empire's extensive road network, ensuring that every corner of the Inca world was nourished and connected. But it wasn't just about growing and distributing food. The Incas were also masterful miners, extracting valuable resources like gold and silver from the bowels of the earth. While they didn't use these precious metals as currency, because, remember, no coins, they understood their symbolic and practical value. Gold and silver were crafted into ornaments and religious artifacts, reinforcing the divine status of the Sapa Inca and the empire's spiritual elite. It was a clever way to maintain social order, reminding everyone that their emperor was as much a celestial being as a political leader. The Inca economy wasn't just an abstract system. It was a living, breathing entity that evolved with the needs of the empire. Trade wasn't just about goods, but also about ideas and technologies, facilitated by the constant movement of people and resources. This was an economy built on the principle of "you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, with a focus on communal benefit rather than individual profit. It's a setup that might seem foreign in today's world, but for the Incas, it was the glue that held everything together. But let's not get too swept away in the romance of the utopian economic system. The reality was not all sunshine and rainbows. The Mida system we touched upon earlier wasn't just a labor tax. It was also an economic lever, ensuring that the empire's grand projects could be realized without draining local resources. The burden of Mida fell unevenly across the population, with different regions contributing in various ways depending on their resources and skills. While some communities might boast skilled stonemasons, others had to rely on sheer manpower to meet their obligations. In essence, the Inca economy was a balancing act, teetering on the edge of efficiency and exploitation. It was a system that worked, mostly, because it was an empire that demanded cohesion in the face of external and internal challenges. The Incas understood that their survival depended on their ability to mobilize resources and labor on a massive scale, and they did so with a deftness that continues to inspire awe. So, as we continue to unravel the threads of the Inca narrative, it's clear that their economy was as much a wonder as their architecture. From the quipus' knotted cords to the terraces' verdant tiers, every aspect of their economic system was intricately woven into the fabric of their society. The Incas weren't just builders of stone, they were builders of systems, crafting an empire that could stand the test of time. And while their economy might not have jingled with the sound of coins, it thrummed with the rhythm of an empire that knew how to turn challenges into opportunities. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover about the empire that nodded its way into history, one string at a time. And so, as we unravel the last strands of this epic saga, let's confront the elephant in the Andes, the fall of the Inca Empire. Spoiler alert, it's a crash course in how the mighty can fall, courtesy of a few hundred Spaniards and a bewildering mix-up of fate, germs, and guns. Picture the year 1532, when the Inca Empire, at the peak of its glory, was caught off guard by none other than Francisco Pizarro and his merry band of conquistadors. Armed with just 168 men, 62 horses, and a determination that would make even the most tenacious door-to-door salesman blush, Pizarro managed to pull off what seemed impossible. He toppled an empire that spanned over 770,000 square miles and housed millions, all without the luxury of modern warfare. So how did Pizarro achieve what seemed like a historical magic trick? Well, part of it was timing. The Inca were in the midst of a civil war between two brothers, Atahualpa and Huascar, who were vying for the throne after their father, Huayna Capac, kicked the bucket thanks to a European-introduced disease. Because yes, smallpox had already made its grim debut in the Americas, serving as an unwitting ally to the Spaniards. While the Inca were busy fighting each other, Pizarro swooped in, like a vulture spotting roadkill. And let's talk about those Spaniard advantages for a moment. Steel armor and cavalry, check. Gunpowder and cannons, double check. A total disregard for treaties and a penchant for double-crossing. Nailed it. Pizarro invited Atahualpa for a friendly meet-and-greet in the town of Cajamarca, only to ambush him, capture him, and eventually execute him after extracting a roomful of gold and silver as ransom. It was the ultimate bait-and switch, one that left the Inca leadership decapitated, literally and figuratively. But here's the kicker. While the Spanish had their fancy gadgets and Machiavellian tactics, the real game-changer was the Incas' centralized system of governance. It was like having all your passwords stored on one device and then handing it over to the first hacker who asked nicely. The Incas centralized communication, military command, and leadership meant that once the head was cut off, the body flailed helplessly. With their emperor gone and the Spanish exploiting internal divisions, the empire unraveled faster than you can say Mida. Yet, despite the collapse, the Incas' architectural legacy stood firm. Their constructions, those marvels of stone and sweat, didn't just crumble overnight. Machu Picchu, for instance, remained hidden in the clouds, untouched by Spanish hands until the early 20th century. The city of Cusco, though razed and rebuilt, still bore the unmistakable foundation of Inca craftsmanship. The durability of these structures was a testament to the Incas' genius in stone masonry. Their buildings outlasted the Spanish invasion, natural disasters, and even the passage of time. Fast forward to today, and those Inca feats are still the stuff of architectural legend. Modern engineers and architects study their seamless stonework, their precision in aligning structures with celestial bodies, and their resilience against earthquakes. It's like the Incas left an ancient masterclass in construction, complete with stone-cutting tips and lessons in structural integrity. The question remains, how did they do it without modern technology? The answer, sheer ingenuity and a profound understanding of the natural world. But let's not pretend it's all romance and mystery. Inca's architectural prowess was as much about practicality as it was about aesthetics. Those terraces weren't just a pretty face, they were essential for agriculture. The stone walls were designed not just to withstand the test of time, but also to endure the frequent seismic activities of the Andes. Their aqueducts didn't just provide water, they were the veins of a living, breathing society. Today, the legacy of the Incas' architecture continues to influence modern design. Sustainable building practices, the use of local materials, and the incorporation of nature into urban planning all echo the Inca approach. We may have swapped llamas for cranes and quippers for CAD software, but the foundational principles remain. The Incas remind us that true architectural brilliance doesn't just lie in erecting edifices that scrape the sky, but in crafting spaces that harmonize with their surroundings and endure through the ages. As we wrap up this tale, it's clear that the Inca Empire was a tapestry of contradictions, a society where the grand and the grim coexisted, where innovation walked hand in hand with obligation. They were empire builders who, despite their downfall, left a legacy etched in stone, one that continues to captivate and inspire. So, whether you're a history buff, an aspiring architect, or just someone who loves a good underdog story, remember the Incas. They were the masters of turning mountains into monuments, and their legacy is a reminder that human ingenuity knows no bounds.